Hello and welcome to Lab Padre's Starship Orbital Test Flight. We're going to go ahead and do the commentary now, and so we're going to go ahead and introduce everybody. My name is Thomas. Starting it off, go ahead and pass it over to Phila Kid.
Good morning. This is Phila Kid from Connecticut. Well, good morning, everybody. Everybody had your coffee ready to go? We're going to have a fun day.
I'm NateZ, live from Georgia. I hope you are as excited as we are for the possibility of this launch today.
This is Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now, joining the Lab Padre stream today. I'm reporting live from Starbase.
Hello, Stephen and Nate, Phila Kid. It's going to be an amazing day. Obviously, we've got a large lineup of things that we're going to be doing here. So first off, we're going to kind of go through a little bit of the checklist and things that we should see, and other basically milestone markers as we go throughout the day. And we'll be bringing those up throughout the stream and talking about those, as well as questions. So if you have questions, type @questions in order for us to pull those in. And it's going to be an amazing day. So let's kind of dig in here. So big ticket items we've already have basically done. We've got the FAA launch license. It happened on the 14th. We've already got license from the FCC county. We've also got the NOTAMs in place, the Notice to All Airmen, that basically closes the airspace around us. So that's in place in the U.S. and Mexico. Then we also have the restrictions for all mariners in the local area. So they've currently have it blocked off over at, let's say, the port, basically, the entrance, between the jetties at South Padre Island and just the north of the beach at Boca Chica Beach. And then we also have the additional closures for the road itself. So it's closed all the way over to where Stephen's at. So Stephen, what are we looking at as far as the status of all the police at the location? Are they still there? Everything looking good?
Yeah, just off to my left, I can see the hard roadblock, as it's called. That's where no one is allowed beyond that point, including SpaceX personnel. It's called the blast danger area beyond that point. And about an hour ago, we saw a caravan of vehicles leaving the Mega Bay area on Highway 4 heading west. And I believe those were the final SpaceX technicians and engineers who had finished all their hands-on work out at the pad. And they've moved back to a fallback position as well.
All right. And what else are you going to be giving us here today while we're going through the entire commentary as things are progressing?
Well, I'm going to be monitoring SpaceX's mission audio feed. That will provide us, I think, the most up-to-date news on the progress of the countdown. I'm going to check that now. I haven't seen any confirmation yet that the propellant loading is go. That was expected to occur a little while ago. And yet I'm not seeing any confirmation yet that has occurred. Doesn't mean it hasn't occurred, but we can't officially say that they're still targeting 8 a.m. right now because we were expecting that a few minutes ago and haven't gotten it yet.
All right. So the typical procedures we've seen, at least at the site, the first thing that came up was basically venting at the orbital tank farm. That's the first thing that we all have always seen beforehand. It's basically preconditioning the whole system. And we did see some of that this morning. So they're at least getting prepared to do, the prop load and basically testing all of their orbital systems, or their really ground systems for the orbital test or orbital tank farm. Wow. It's an early morning for all of us. So sorry about that. The next off on the list of things I've got is the pad is clear. So that's a huge plus there. As Stephen pointed out, they've already moved everybody from the build site. There's a large caravan, as he mentioned. We also have the WB-57 headed to Hawaii, and then one coming from Houston as well, which is kind of interesting because it was just a little bit north at Harlingen just the other day. So I guess they came over to Harlingen, got the plans of what they were going to do, and then headed their own separate ways. So that was a little bit different. So one thing we're going to do is as SpaceX Stream starts up, we're going to go ahead and switch over to that on our stream, so you don't need to change streams. That way you've got picture-in-picture. We're actually going to be a little bit more live, I believe, than SpaceX, because they're going to be using 4K, and that's going to delay it about 6 to 10 seconds. We'll be delayed maybe about 1 to 3 seconds, somewhere in there. So it's going to be a lot quicker. And then one other thing you should do at home, go ahead and hit playback speed on the bottom right where that little gear icon is showing, and do about 2 times speed, and then go every once in a while hit 1.25 speed, because you will be caught up to our live stream as well as all commentary and all audio. So you'll be as live as possible.
And Thomas, the WB-57 is halfway down to from Ellington down to Boca Chica.
Ooh, we're getting closer on that side as well. That's one of the huge milestones. We do have a T minus 1 minute, or I'm sorry, 1 hour and 30 minutes marker coming up now. So we should have had prop load go at least 30 minutes ago from SpaceX, but we haven't heard anything on that quite yet. But one of the things we will be looking at as we're moving along is the tank farm itself. We will be able to switch views as well here today, so that'll be nice. So we can actually see the activity at the test site. The current view we have right now is from Raptor Roost, courtesy of Lab, and I think he's actually with us as well. He'll be able to jump in every once in a while. Hey, Lab.
Howdy. Hello, everybody. Thank y'all for tuning in. Time is at hand. Time is at hand. 4 years in the making, and 2 years of us waiting for this super heavy to lift off. The anticipation is so thick you can cut it around here.
You could feel it in here as well. It's quite interesting. We haven't had a flight for nearly 2 years, since SN15, and I was there with you last, Lab, and it was a blast. So good luck for all of us and all the other streamers out there today. This is going to be an epic flight. Even if it doesn't fly, we will still get, or we should still get a WDR. So that's a wet dress rehearsal. Let's see, a couple other items we have, and this is courtesy of Grandpa Joe for these technical items. We do have the FTS installed. We obviously have a full stack. You can kind of see it there in the shadows as the early morning sun rises. Again, this is the Raptor Roost view, and we just saw it from Rover 2 a little bit ago. And so a couple of things that we'll see here in a little bit is we should start to see the heat exchangers start turning on. You'll see the hippos that we lovingly refer to them as, because they kind of look like hippos. You'll see quite a bit of venting off of different sides of the fuel farm. They kind of should happen around the same time, but there'll be preconditioning on the methane side and then the oxygen side. That's the biggest part. And that's not something we can see visibly. Even if we don't hear audibly from SpaceX, we will know immediately that they're going on the procedures to do the prop load.
Thomas?
Yeah.
I might want to point out that they are pre-chilling all of the lines up to the OLM, and they've been venting there for the last hour plus.
Oh, wow. That's a little bit earlier than the T minus 2 hours that we were talking about. So they've moved that schedule ahead of us. That's good.
Another thing, Thomas, the methane hippos they're not venting yet, but they're fully chilled up to the top already.
Oh, interesting. They never vented them off. They're just
they're wide as can be.
Wow. Okay. So a couple of changes in the procedures that we normally would see, but that's good news. Every little change we can add back into our own notes and keep using that in the future so that we can accurately gauge their progress.
Yeah, on the first launch day, everything seems to have started up early. They've had the CH4 lines up and chilling, and the stack that we refer to as the Pope stack has been recondensing or reconditioning the return side. So they've been using the full loop on the CH4 side for quite a while.
Oh, wow. I can see it there now on, I believe that's on Nerdle Cam. It's so beautiful right now. So yeah, that's the venting you can see right there. It's the main methane heat exchanger that they have. It's basically boiling off nitrogen, cooling it down, really getting the basically, I'm sorry, methane cooled down using the nitrogen, and that's what you see basically going off in the air with the what's called condensate. That's just vapor that you see. The air is kind of condensing into that water droplets, and then it basically clarifies. I can't remember what that term is, but anyways, it's really beautiful to see right now. So I guess that's a huge check off on that list. The lines you said are already venting. We could see over at the right-hand side on NerdleCam here is that they have venting coming off all the way to the launch table. So they're already getting everything ready. So the last thing we'll pretty much see before they do the start the prop load is we will see that stop. So that'll completely close off on both the methane side and the oxygen side. They'll completely close that entire system off. So there's basically two systems that go back and forth to cool down all of the lines. Each of those lines, they have a lot of heat energy in them, and you have to cool them down prior to putting propellants inside. So that's the part we're seeing right now. Otherwise, you basically putting gas directly into the vehicle instead of your propellants that you want that are liquid.
You know what I'm surprised is, Thomas, we're not seeing any venting off the OLIT at this point, and I would expect that they want to get those lines chilled down fairly quickly too.
I thought that's what we were seeing on that view. There was quite a bit of venting off of the table. That wasn't from the table?
No, from the table. I'm talking about the tower.
Oh, up above. Okay, so
Yeah, the ship GSE lines.
Okay. So yeah, that's going to be the next one on the list. We should see venting off for the tower as well. So those are the next parts really before we get to the prop load, of course. But once we start to see a little bit of frost line on the vehicles, we'll be able to see it really first on the booster. It'll start off from the bottom and start working its way up the top, and we'll see the same thing happen with the Starship. You'll see this little white line going up, and they'll see little clouds forming off of it. That is the beginnings of the frost line. That's the prop load. That is propellant, basically locks on one side. It's going to be methane on the higher end on both of the vehicles. And we should be able to see both of those because we are on the backside viewing from our old pad cam view. Man, it's been a while.
Hey, Thomas, I have a couple questions. You ready to take some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Roger Z, I've always wondered why re-entry is hot and leaving the atmosphere is not. Why is that?
Well, you're taking all of the energy that has been built up during launch. So think of all of the flames coming out of the vehicle. That's literal energy that you are spitting out the bottom of the rocket. And you are taking all that energy and you're applying it over a short duration of basically anywhere from several let's say minutes. You're going to be looking at I'd have to go back and look at the exact time frame here for how long it takes, but basically between T-0 and then we're going to see the ship basically, or the boosters light up, the ship goes, and then we're looking at looks like about I'm going to say 9 minutes and 20 seconds because that's what they're saying for their whole duration here. So you're taking all of that energy that you've built up, and you're saying, basically, was it 1,200 miles per hour more? You're basically at orbital velocities are 14. Anyways, you're taking that massive amount of energy, and you are running into the atmosphere where the atomic oxygen is basically just sitting there, as well as everything else that's just small amounts of atmosphere. And you're running into it, and you are basically speeding that up or dissipating your energy, your velocity from your vehicle into the atmosphere. And that's where all that plasma and everything else comes from. Stephen or Nate, do you guys want to go into that a little bit more, or are we good on that?
Well, the other half of the question would be, why doesn't that occur when you're leaving orbit or leaving the Earth, going into orbit? And it's because One of the biggest things is you're already in the atmosphere itself. You're in our nice thick atmosphere that gives us oxygen and everything else. You're not trying to get back into it as you would from space.
And you're going slower as you rise, and as you're coming in, you're faster decelerating into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is your brake. And when you're leaving, the atmosphere is getting softer. So the higher you go up, the faster you go up, the thinner the atmosphere, and just the opposite on the way down.
I guess there's one other thing I can address as well. So max Q, the maximum aerodynamic pressure you're going to see on the vehicle, it's going to basically go from the troposphere all the way up through the atmosphere until there is pretty much nothing, and you basically get to the Kármán line, which is where there is no usable atmosphere to do anything with. At that point, in between those 2 points, is where you pass through max Q, and that's 55 seconds in. Where I said earlier about that 9-minute, 20-second mark is where we should be seeing Starship basically turn off its engines. So between those 2 points, the booster has separated from the ship, and you still have all that energy you are building up on the ship side because it's still accelerating. So it's just slamming in the atmosphere on the other end of it and slowing itself down.
Okay, I've got another couple questions here. Nicola Evangelista, do we know what the altitude will be reached from Starship and Booster what is the altitude that Starship and Booster will reach this time?
I don't know if this was something that we discussed in several places in the last couple of days, and I don't think anyone has come up with a definite answer. SpaceX has not shared the exact answer to that question either.
Hey,
I know that it's going to. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, this is Steven. I can chime in from that. I was listening to a briefing from the FAA last week, and they said that the license application from SpaceX for Starship showed an apogee of the target of 146 miles, which is about 235 kilometers. I don't know about the Super Heavy booster, though.
Yeah, they're going to be below the Kármán line by far. They're similar profiles to Falcon 9, from what I recall, or at least that was the original postulations and like tests that people have gone through and done simulations on. So it's far below the Kármán line where the two split off. So it's just still in the atmosphere, or barely just in the upper atmosphere when they split off from each other.
It's a good point. For Falcon 9, those typically do reach an apogee of about 110, 120 kilometers. And like you said, this is a similar profile to Falcon 9, so we might see the Super Heavy just hit the Kármán line. Be interesting to see that what the altitude actually is achieved in flight.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of this will be probably covered by SpaceX as well. So some of this information is still very new to us because this is the first orbital test flight of both the Starship and the Super Heavy going through all the way into almost an orbit. There's about, 10 to 50 meters per second speed that we are looking at to change that into an orbital point, but it's not an actual orbital flight. It's close to it, though.
Thomas, let me break in here a second. I got an announcement from SpaceX. The Starship team is go for prop load, now targeting 8:20 C Central Time.
And is that coming from their Twitter, or is that
coming from their Twitter? Yes.
Okay, nice.
And that was at 7:40. Another question from Lost in Blank. When does the launch window end?
Nate, you want to cover that?
Oh, wow. I'm Eastern time, and I always get this messed up. So I believe locally the launch window closes at, I believe it's 9:30. Correct? Isn't that correct? 9:30 around then? Wow.
That was like 10:30 because it's 3 hours and it starts at 7. Or was it starting earlier? Now you've got me second guessing.
Give me a second. I'll find that out and I'll touch base.
Okay.
We have another question. How heavy is Starship when fueled? From Shizuru. Sorry.
Well, together the ship and the booster included, as well as their propellants, and if you ever put basically all of your cargo aboard as well, which could go up to about 150 metric tons, you're looking at about 5,000 tons, so 5 megatons in metric. That's about what you would see. This one's going to be a bit lighter, I believe, because we do not have much of a cargo, if any. I've got some speculation on that. But the other part is that they don't need to fill up all of the tanks, or if they are filling all the tanks, they're going to do some other testing as well, and we can get into that later as well. So there's a couple of interesting parts there where we might have some interesting weight changes just for this test flight.
And back to the launch window, it ended up, the local launch window, so this would be Central Standard Time, it's 7 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
All right. And is that per the FAA that we're looking at, or is it just SpaceX saying this?
And this was, I believe, SpaceX saying this. This
Okay.
is their mission plan for the first 3 days they have listed for attempts.
All right. Sounds good. I'm looking at their basically whole NOTAM where it says 7 to 10:05 CDT. So it's basically be enclosed airspace for quite a while. But what's interesting is that regardless of what we get, I know that Mauricio over at RGV is going to do a flyover. Regardless, today either get a nice view of the WDR or post launch. So this will be very interesting.
I have a couple super chats, Thomas. Can I jump in here? Thomas?
My side. Go ahead.
I have a couple super chats. Mando Dave, $5 US. Thank you very much, Mondo Dave. Been watching since Starhopper, and finally we're going to watch Starship take it to the next level. Yes, we are, Mondo. Thank you for your support. I have Dave Kimball for $10. Why is the first ever launch the booster Why is this the first launch of the booster with a fully integrated system? Would it not seem wise to launch the booster alone for the first test? Not that I'm upset with this, so it's the ship on top.
So in order to do oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Thomas.
I was going to say that in order to do a test with the booster, you would basically have to do something like a suborbital hop. You're not going to get nearly as much of the forces or the other tests that you need in order to verify the full system. So that's why they're going through. They've done already the WDR, at least before, where they do the whole prop. They've even done other systems where they have cryo in the vehicle as well, so it can hold the weight. It's just the question of weight at liftoff is going to be accelerated. So we're looking at an acceleration of almost 1.6. I think we're going to be a little bit below that for this particular test, but it's going to be pretty close to that, which is 1.6 times the amount for Earth's gravity. So earlier I said that 5,000 metric tons. We're now going to be closer to that 7,500 metric tons plus. That would be equivalent of what the entire stack sees. You want to really verify that whole system. Now, that is a good question why they haven't done, like, let's say, a suborbital hop with the booster. One reason why is you'd basically have the booster out in the Gulf, just like you would in this case as well, because they're not going to be doing any of the catches or anything like that, at least for the first minimum 3 launches, it seems. That could change because it says May on their documentation. That was supplemental to the FAA, that they could be landing it after like the 4th launch, but could be even sooner, depending on how well things go. But Elon had talked about this yesterday. We kind of have to keep our expectations low. As long as it's past the launch site and basically it's clear of the tower and everything else, and if something goes wrong and it basically explodes during launch, that would be a success, because you do not want it to take out the launch site. So as long as that's fine, we're good there. But the other part of the question, uh, uh, as far as like having the ship on top that you mentioned here, Dave, is you want to be able to also try to get those orbital velocities with both the stages. You're testing the full system and really verifying it here today. So even if it doesn't make it to their expected orbit, or basically partial orbit, basically comes back into Earth, we will get all of the data that, or at least SpaceX will get all the data they need in order to verify systems or things, find the parts that are broken with the whole system. And today we're going to really test all of that out, hopefully.
Hey, Thomas, I've got a little update on status. We are currently not vending at the OLM, and it looks like the CH4 kettle boilers are at full pressure.
Yeah, SpaceX has tweeted the same thing, that the fueling of Super Heavy booster is underway.
Hoo-hoo. Yeah, that T-minus 2 hours mark you had it. You said it was 7:40, which was, I think it was supposed to be 6:40. That puts us at a launch currently right now at 8:40. If everything goes right, I don't think everything will go right. We're going to probably see a couple of holds here today, but it's going to be really beautiful. So 8:40 the earliest.
The YB-57 is on station, and last time I checked, it was at flight level 30,000, and I'll get an update in a little bit. I have a couple more questions. One from Rusty Android, a super chat for $5. Texas native, currently living in and tuning in from Japan. Excited to be able to watch this test live. Go SpaceX, go Starship. Thank you, Rusty Android. Appreciate the contribution. And I have a Vector, 10 US dollars. You've come a long way. Lewis, proud of you, brother. Also sending good vibes out to Tuxmaster, wherever you are. We wish you are all watching with us. That's from Vector.
By the way, we've got a big announcement here. Anomalia posted, we have frost lines. So that's a huge step here. That's what at least they're saying. So looks like they're actually into the full prop load. We do have frost lines as well. So that's good news. And this is Rover 1 I heard earlier, so I need to correct that. I thought it was Nerdle. It was a very different view from what I was normal. I'm sorry, Raptor Roost. We had a Rover 1 as well view that was different from normal. Go ahead, Phila Kid.
Yeah, we moved Rover 1 last evening.
Yeah, it's just so beautiful watching the Starship venting. Wow.
Another super chat from Daniel R. $5 US. Thank you, Daniel. I've been following since Hopper days. I am so excited to watch Starship fly. Thank you, Lab and the team, for all you do. Fly high.
All right, we're going to check out and see if we can see the WB-57 here. It's basically up in the sky, and Lab's getting a great view of it for us. Wow.
Yeah, that's spectacular. We can see that's right over our position at Starbase.
Wow, that's got such a wingspan.
I guess I don't have to report where it's at anymore, huh?
Well, as long as it stays here, yeah, you'll be fine. But also, we need what's going on with Hawaii. That's the WB-57 that is also very interesting for us, because that's the one that's supposed to capture the other side of the trajectory for the Starship re-entering the atmosphere. And so I'm hoping we get a thermal view of that and a live view, and that would be just incredible. Can you hear it from here, or is it still very quiet, Stephen?
The WB-57, no, we cannot hear it right now. It's quite high, and it's still not directly over us. It's offshore a little bit.
Okay, so it's going to be supposed to be about 50,000 feet up, is what it was saying on the notice for it, or at least that's what I can recall for it, and that's pretty far up there. Oh, sorry about that. I wasn't hitting push to talk there. We basically did skip a couple of steps here already today. We didn't see any of the venting from the tower. It's gone ahead and moved forward from that, but we do have the frost line, as Anomalia was talking about earlier, or had posted to me, as well as everybody else here. The next part we're looking at, it's going to be a while. It's going to be about 16 minutes or 15 minutes beforehand. We'll start to see the engine chill. I believe the documentation from SpaceX said about T-minus 12 minutes, but give or take, that should be about what we would see before the launch. And that's going to be the real major one. So it's going to be a little bit before we see some of the other major marks between here and now and then. Thank you so much for that view, Lab. That was incredible to see the W-57. I don't think we have seen it before.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool shot.
Hey, Lab, well, we've got you here. Go ahead, Lab.
Go ahead. I was going to say it's heading like looks like southwest. It's probably over Mexico now.
We have a question here from a gentleman by the name of Robert Wells. What happened to Predator Cam?
We had some damage happen to it on the last static fire, so we're working on getting that back in order. Thank you. Hopefully we'll get it back soon.
Is there any updated news on it, or is that where it's at now? As far as
that's where it's at now. I don't really have any updated news on it.
Okay. But we do still currently have the Rover 2 cam with VR that's currently at the old pad cam location. We're with pretty much everybody else over there as well. So it's quite packed with cameras. That's what we saw last night. So there's going to be plenty of views from that location. But I definitely like ours because it's basically our old home. That's where it used to be ages ago on the stream. Yeah, there it is again. That looks beautiful. And you can see all the venting from the fuel farm. I also have a graphic that we might be able to throw up here to just kind of list off what everything is real quick. And then we can kind of go from there. We'll have to ask the camera operator to switch over to the first preset if they can. And then we can go from there, but we'll get to that in due time.
While he's doing that, I got another question for you.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Sarah KB7. How many gallons of liquid dihydrogen monoxide do they dump onto the launch pad during launch?
I think I saw something about like 5,000 gallons or something that was for the specifically like to the supplementary information that SpaceX has submitted to the FAA. They said some number, I think it was around that, like 5,000 gallons or 5,000 gallons per second. But it's going to be really kind of a small amount in comparison to what they need for an actual water deluge. Really, they call it like a Fire X system, where it's a basically an overpressure event prevention system. I can't remember now what they call it. It was a fire suppression system, or fire detonation, or a detonation suppression system. That's the correct wording that was from the document. And basically what they're doing is they're blowing water as well as nitrogen. So that's the dihydrogen monoxide that you were mentioning earlier. But yeah, the amount is going to be very insignificant compared to what they will have at later points. So either between tests 2 and 3, or maybe post tests of 3, that would be the orbital launch attempt number 3. We will see, I think, a water deluge system installed between 2 or 3, or just after 3. And that's going to be pretty huge because it's going to have quite a bit of water that they will be able to basically dump on that. Does 2 things. It reduces the sound energy that the rocket is basically imparting upon a lot of the launch infrastructure and the local area. So Lab, you're about 4 miles away. It'll be a little bit quieter for those launches at the initial launch, but it will basically get louder as it rises, and that's something you should expect for each of these launches.
Thomas, I wanted to point out they're doing tower chill right now and venting off of the ship QD level on the backside of the tower.
I see that, and that's interesting because we kind of skipped it on the base of the tower, but you can really see it now at the middle of the tower. That's going to be for the, as you said, the ship QD, and that should be the methane side that they're now venting off, because that's the side I believe that they will vent from. There's another vent just up to the right that you can sometimes see turn on for a little bit. We haven't seen that happen today. That should be the LOX side. So liquid oxygen, that's what LOX refers to, sorry. Want to try to use the least a number of acronyms as I can here today, because it helps out for those of you who are new to the whole experience. Oh, look at those birds going through. Those weren't a glitch. Those are birds. That was awesome.
I have another question from Robert Wells. If everything is a go, how well is Starship going to stand the pressure when it fires? And how well is the ship after the launch?
Okay, so to answer that real quick, the ship itself is supposed to be able to hold about 6 bar of pressure, give or take a little bit, and they can actually go up higher than that. We've seen, at least for the different tests that they've done over the years, especially with just regular tanks that they'll do a burst test on. The booster is a little bit more of a mystery, but if I remember correctly, there was at the very bottom of the tank, if let's say you had nothing but methane in the lines, it would be about 13 bar, but that would be saying differential pressure, meaning the outside has no more pressure besides just atmosphere, and that's not the case. They have liquid oxygen in that tank. So the differential pressure actually goes down, which is good because you don't have other issues. But you'll still be looking at least 6 bars or above of basically pressure. And most of that will be just hydrostatic pressure, meaning all the liquids above it are basically pressing down. So the very bottom of each of the tanks is going to be your highest point of pressure. And that's basically what's holding up the entire vehicle in a way, is not the hydrostatic pressure, but the pressure in general. It keeps the vehicle much more rigid, but it does something kind of interesting because the propellants are basically liquid oxygen, liquid methane. It cools down the skin of the vehicle, and the whole thing shrinks about 14 to 18 inches. If you ever have like a zoomed in part of the nose cone before and after prop load, you'll see the entire thing will shrink quite a bit. And you can even see that with the ship QD even. You'll see it slowly move downwards as it's being completely filled. That's a little bit due to the weight, but also really due to the skin shrinking. So we do have that view available for the labels, so we can go through and describe what we have real quick to show on the other view here.
While they're switching, I've got some super chats I want to cover.
I got the view up now. So I guess starting off real quick, we've got the orbital fuel farm, which is starting all of this. We've got LOX, which is liquid oxygen, LN2, which is liquid nitrogen, water, and that's going to be those 2 tanks in the front that you can see. Basically the nitrogen, and there's actually an empty water tank on the right side that they don't use because it's has some issues. And then you've got just a couple of white tanks at the bottom. Those are methane, and then the basically you've got the old Starship hopper in between. But the real action is going to be happening at basically from the orbital launch pad, which is OLP, going kind of up from the rest of it. And you've got some parts that are called chines. There's also a large debate about what you call those. It's chines or strakes, but they're just an aerodynamic feature of the booster. Then you've got the entire booster, which is the Superheavy. You can see that basically going from the point where you see that grid fin sticking out all the way down to that launch table at the bottom. That's the booster. And then everything from that above is the Starship. And the chopsticks should not be holding up the ship or the booster. I believe there should be kind of a T pose. So that will allow us to go through and let the vehicle basically settle and shrink a little bit. But that's something you see during the prop load. It will happen there. And the very top is the header tanks. We probably shouldn't see much of the frost on that, but if we do, it would basically just be on the very tip of that nose cone. And this has all been loaded up by the integration tower. And then later on, we should see that ship QD arm swing out to the right-hand side above the little basically palm tree. I think that one's called Bert. But yeah, that's a quick live view of all of the major components that you can see on this view here. So if you have questions about what things are, go ahead and ask those in the chat at questions. And right now you can see the frost lines really well from this view. That is beautiful. So thank you for throwing those up.
I have some super chats, Thomas.
Yeah, let's do them.
I've got Erna at 20,000 Indonesian rupa. Thank you very much, Irma. I got Doug Dory, $5 US. I've got Stoke Pusher. Why? Just having a look at the footage, yet still hard to tell. Any idea how fast the horizontal splashdown speed will be? A belly buster? Can you handle that question, Thomas?
Oh, sorry. You said that the Starship will be a belly buster?
Yeah. How fast is the horizontal splashdown speed?
It'll be at terminal velocity of the Starship, kind of horizontally. If it makes it all the way to that point, that's the big asterisk in this. So as long as everything goes right, because there's a million things that can potentially go wrong, but you need everything to go right. It would basically be at terminal velocity, and I think we're going to be looking at, what was it, like 120 miles per hour? There might be some other better info that either Nate or Stephen has for the terminal velocity there, but I think that's about what we're looking for at the very end, and that's basically when it's hitting the troposphere. That's just sea level. It's just slamming into that air and slowing down even further.
Yep.
Okay.
That's
I have another question. Why?
Oh, hold on. What was that, Stephen?
I was just saying, yeah, that's right. We've heard from the FAA as well, who's obviously reviewed everything SpaceX is doing as part of the licensing process. No propulsive maneuvers at all on Starship on descent.
Okay, what was the next question that you have here, Phila Kid?
Retro Robbins, and I think we almost hit this right there. Why, when they give it a full test flight, do they not try and land rather than a splash in the ocean?
So that was a question that was asked to Elon yesterday, and he didn't answer it. And I almost think it was almost intentional, because the interesting part is that the methane header tank will be empty when they do that belly flop into the ocean. And it basically will explode shortly thereafter. And there's a helicopter. Nice. So anyways, the header tank being empty is actually an interesting sign of something else that may be going on. So one of two things is either they don't load any propellant into the methane header tank, and that's at the top of the vehicle next to the liquid oxygen header tank. And one of the things we might be looking at is they might do a in orbit, or basically in zero G, fuel transfer. So from the methane header tank to the main tanks, they would be able to transfer that fuel between them. And then before it does reentry, one thing they do is they dump all of their propellants that aren't in the header tanks. That's basically because you don't want your vehicle basically sloshing around during reentry, and you don't want that extra weight to basically be taking you down when you don't need it. It's just extra stuff. You just want it as light as possible. They'll keep it at that 6 bar pressure, and they'll be regulating. There might be some residuals in that tank, so liquid residuals, but the rest should be what's called ullage, or just gas inside of the main tanks that holds it all together. So that's a huge one. If they hit it, that would be a huge test that they could do if it gets it to zero G. And so it's a bigger test, honestly, than doing the whole kickflip burn and doing a controlled landing or basically a splashdown into the ocean. That's my speculation so far of what I believe is going on, and we might find out more from SpaceX here later today because they love to find more or to give more goodies during these streams. So we'll see here soon what's going on there. What's
Thomas, another piece of speculation about why they're not trying to do any maneuvering? They've modeled where they expect it to ultimately flop into the ocean at, and then the next two launches are the two ships that do not have any tiling or anything to re-enter. So they've modeled where they're going to break up at. I really think that part of this too is if they tried to bring ship 24 in for a normal simulated landing with propellant, and it was to break up, you'd get an explosion, and at that point their debris field would become unpredictable, and they will be going over the back end of Hawaii as they come in. So I think part of this is safety, being they don't know how the vehicle is going to perform as it re-enters.
And that basically would put it in between from the beginning point of where ship 26 and 27 will basically do their disintegration burn and debris field to their current landing point. So it could basically happen anywhere in between. That's an interesting one. I've also heard other people say they believe it's for safety reasons as well, because they think it's going to explode or have more ability to explode. But really, at those velocities, the debris field, it's pretty much the biggest problem is further on you start breaking up, like ship 26 and 27, that debris field is going to be much wider than it would be if you held on until the very last second and you blew up over the ocean 30 seconds before you would normally do your splashdown or something along those lines. So the further in you go, the smaller that debris field would be.
Well, and the larger your pieces of debris could become, the further you get into descent into the atmosphere too. It could be very problematic. They're definitely erring on the side of being cautious, which is what they should do.
Yeah, it would be very cautious, but I don't think it's going to be a huge explosion if it was from the methane header tank. There's a bit there, but it wouldn't be enough to do a whole lot. It's really the entire atmosphere being in the way, just kind of spreading the debris out, that would do more as far as anything on the debris side. What's the next question we have, Phila Kid?
I've got
live view.
I've got some super chats and $10 US from Animal. Full send.
Thank you, Animal.
John Vine, $2 pound sterling. Awesome annotations. Robert, $20 US. Thank you, Robert. Etvid, $4.99 US. Thank you, Etvid. And Joel Cornish, $7 Australian, or $7.99 Australian. Thanks for all the live streams and updates. Go Starship. And I have a bunch of new members I'm going to run through real quick. Tannel's Weather Marine Space Station. Martin Sorolla. Sinate 2.0. Tim Smith. Susan Smith. Papa Girl. Ben Foray. Ed Callum. Jeremiah Malkin. And Kenneth K. And last but not least, Kiwi Raven. Thank you for becoming a member and enjoy the programs.
Thank you, everybody, for donating and also becoming members. Every little bit helps. It keeps all the cameras running, and it's quite a bit of a project Lab has got going on all these years. I'm trying to think of when he started. Was probably 2018. Lab, if you're there, can you correct me if I'm wrong? Or you may have started even earlier than that.
Yeah, I'm here. No, it was March of 2019 that we started covering SpaceX down here in Boca Chica. Late March.
Right, I think you did a couple of shots with your camera and posted them on YouTube, and no live streaming or anything like that. It was earlier than that, but I really have to go back.
Yeah, it was right when they started testing the hopper and doing static fires.
Wow, it's been a long time. So,
It's been a fun ride.
yeah, just over 4 years now. Quick question, Stephen. Is there any news or updates coming from your end that you've heard so far?
Well, we've heard that methane loading has begun on the Super Heavy booster as well. I'm not sure if you're seeing evidence of that in the videos that you're watching from the pad.
Oh yeah, we've got almost halfway on the LOX tank. It looks like, at least on the chines. So it's really good on the methane side as well. I don't see too much on the Starship side here, but we might get another view a little bit to clarify that. Is there anything else that we've heard so far? Is it just prop load, or have you heard anything else they call out from SpaceX yet?
Just the progress of prop load, and based on SpaceX's timeline, the ship propellant loading should have begun a few minutes ago. Based on the timeline on SpaceX's website for an 8:20 a.m. launch.
Okay, that's tracking really good so far.
Yeah, there seems to be some sign that they've started the ship load, but you can't. It's hard to see any frost line just yet.
If you look under the chopstick against the ship, you can above the flaps and under the chopstick, you can almost make out a frost line there.
Oh yeah, we can zoom in here, and I can barely just kind of start to see that. And maybe we can get the Rover 2 view as well if that's available for just a moment. But one thing that let you know, we're going to switch over to SpaceX's stream once they're hitting live.
And because that's imminent, I'm going to pop in here and give a couple more super chats.
Okay.
Stormy Mess, $20 US. Cheers for Lob Padre team. Go Starship. ICT 3D Chris, let's go Starship. Great job, lab team. Sean Rutherford, $10 US. $5. Oh, the Nunda Thunder, down under Thunder. 5 Australian dollars. Been a long time follower of SpaceX and Starship development, and I'm so excited to see this first test flight of Starship and Superheavy. Bob Brown for $19.99 US. Go, go, go. Love you guys. And Alan, $10 US. Go Lab, go Starship. Great job, guys.
Thank you, Phila Kid. Yeah, quite interesting here. They said they were going to be about 45 minutes from launch for their live stream here. So we've got another about 17 minutes before we expect that to happen. Actually, is that T minus still accurate? I have to look at the kind of the numbers real quick. It was, you said 8:20 that we're looking at, or is it 8:40 for the T minus 0, Stephen?
It's 8:20.
Okay.
a.m. Central Time.
All right, so it looks like we're still tracking on that. That's good. So yeah, we'll be cutting off here in about 17 minutes. Is there anything else that we needed to go over that were kind of some of those big ticket items that we should talk about here today?
There's one thing that I wanted to bring up. I do have a thermometer set up on Rover 2. So we're going to be monitoring that to see what kind of ambient temperatures we get in the vicinity. Mouser sent an article to me a while back that said that in the Launchpad area, we should be seeing ambient temperatures of upwards of 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and up to a third of a mile away, 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and a little more than half a mile away, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, all temporary. So we'll be monitoring. I'm not sure how the temperature will be coming in every second or every minute, we'll see exactly, but we'll keep you updated on that.
All right, that's good to know. We're about a third of the mile away with the Rover 2 cam at the old pad cam location, so it's going to get a little warm there briefly. So any of those of you who are watching this live in person, that's Lab, Steven, anybody else listening in right now, kind of a couple of things. You might want to have sunglasses on hand because it's going to get very bright very quickly. It's like looking into the sun. Steven, you should be able to test that for the number of launches you've seen. Does that track about right?
Yeah, I'm really interested to compare this experience with all the launches I've seen. I've covered close to 200 launches at Cape Canaveral and other places, but this is by far the largest rocket. I was actually at the Cape for the Artemis 1 launch in November, which was very visually impressive, very loud, and I'm about the same distance from Starship and Superheavy as I was for that launch. So I'm really eager to have a side-by-side one-for-one comparison.
Oh, that's going to be the best one to ask is you, since you've been there and now you're watching this one. As long as we do have liftoff, get that comparison of how loud, how bright you feel it is in comparison. One other thing to note for everybody else listening in right now, I guess this is the public service announcement here, is to basically stay away from windows during the launch attempt, especially closer you are to the launch here. So stay away from windows. That's one of those things. If there's ever an overpressure event, you could have some cracked windows or other damage that might result in glass falling. That's one thing to watch out for. There was a map that I know Grandpa Joe put together. We were looking at, I think, 2 kilotons if this thing went off with all of the propellant going off relatively at the same time. So that's one thing that you have to kind of watch out for is if you are viewing this, just kind of stay away from glass. If you're that close to anything else, like where you guys are at, Raptor Roost is about 4 miles. So South Padre Island is about 5 miles. And so you should be okay for the further distances as well, but just one thing to kind of note. But really, that sunglasses is the big one. It literally is like looking into the sun for some of these rockets. You'll start to see some interesting discoloration in your eyes. You're like, oh, it's kind of like looking at the sun. You can see it kind of moving around everywhere. It's always an interesting element. But yeah.
Just real quick, just to let you know, everybody here at the Raptor Roost, we are literally the closest people on the planet to this super heavy. An amazing shot, an amazing feeling once this thing hits the air. I cannot wait to hear this thing roar.
Oh, we got some good news. Nate has spotted off the engine chill. What are we seeing there, Nate, on that photo that you posted?
I'm trying to get a confirmation, but the ship, of course, the engines on the ship are in the inner stage, and so they begin engine chill early on the ship as compared to the booster because it's got to be chilled down at launch and also once they're ready for stage separation. So it looks like they began chilling the engines on the ship itself.
Yeah, from our view right now, you can see the top of the booster. You see these little clouds forming off of that just underneath the Starship. Those are for the engine chill. They have lines that go down further to basically get all of the, let's say, liquid and just the cold stuff away from anything sensitive and important. They want to move that further down. And so that's what we're seeing there. The engine chill comes off the booster at the very top.
A little bit of a clarification on that. There can be residual buildup inside the skirt from propellant loading, and at this point, that's actually probably what we're seeing is where they're dumping that over the side of the skirt for now. But that will ultimately also be where engine chill comes from. So thanks to those that helped me clarify that for me.
Ooh, this is getting exciting. Looks like we've got something coming up. Phila Kid, can you grab that one? Got a new super chat coming in.
Oh, I see it there. Racer X, $99 US. Since 2019, we have waited and ate crow. It's time to go. Thank you there, Racer X.
Yes, sir, Racer X. Thank you. It's really great to see you in the house today.
Yeah, Racer's a good friend of ours. I've talked with Racer for a number of years. It's been a while. Glad to hear from you again. Thank you for the donation.
I have one $10 donation from Matt Miller. Thank you, Matt.
Now is a good time to get any final questions. So at questions to get those in before we switch over to SpaceX's live stream here in about 10 minutes.
Elon has now tweeted out that the propellant load is, of course, underway, which we already know, and that liftoff was at T-minus 1 hour. So this would have been at still would put us on track for 8:20.
That is nice to see that we're on track. Once we get a full load in, that's when you usually have a hold. We had a WDR the other day, or a month or two so ago, but it did a hold for at least a few minutes. We even got a SpaceX live stream popping up, and that was unusual to say the least. We weren't expecting that, but it was more than we could have asked for. So that was an amazing experience that
I
we're
believe
going
the
to see here.
SpaceX live stream was on the big static fire. It came out of nowhere, and it had a weird hold right before the static fire happened.
That's right.
And during that hold is when that live stream popped up out of thin air.
Yeah, it was the static fire. It wasn't the WDR. I'm confusing those two events. But yeah, that was quite impressive for the static fire and having that stream just pop up. We got some extra views, which we weren't expecting. It was beautiful. Phila Kid, do we have any other questions here? We've got just under 9 minutes now.
I have no new questions, but I have some new members. Samantha Elkins, Kara Joy, Oscar Roble, Red Baron, Leslie Gernhardt. Welcome to La Padre. Enjoy the show, please.
So one thing I'll jump into is an interesting element that I think SpaceX may be testing. They're going to be testing a lot of things here today, but I think they're going to be testing, these are my speculation. I think they're going to be testing a transfer from the methane header tank to the normal tanks just to do a propellant transfer in 0G. And then another thing I think they're doing today is I think they have 5 Starlinks on board. That was a question that Elon didn't answer yesterday during the spaces, but I've seen 5 Starlinks went into a device we call the PEZ loader because the Starlinks, when they would be deployable, would be like a PEZ dispenser. So that's what Elon's called it as a moniker there. And the interesting thing is I saw the Starlinks go into the box and then the box attached to the vehicle, and then the vehicle, or it basically be destacked from the vehicle, but I never saw the Starlinks inside that PEZ loader after that point. So I have a feeling that we have about 5 of those in there, which would be kind of cool. It means that there's at least some testing you can do. You can do unit testing on the Starlinks themselves, but the doors are welded shut. They're not going anywhere. So it would be a cool test to be able to verify, yes, you can carry some cargo and be able to, let's say, open up the inside of the door if that's not welded all the way shut. Where you can then bump the Starlinks into it, and you get an error, so you get task failed successfully, as I like to say. But those are just a couple of things I hope SpaceX will kind of go over and say what some other elements they're testing today would be, and those would be huge milestones for sure if those are indeed what happens. And I see some good views of Lab, Steven, and all the others out there.
I wanted to point out that WB-57 is about 250 kilometers offshore at a flight level of 45,500 feet.
Oh, it's a clear day. Hey, Lab. So far, do you guys have a clear sky all the way up, or is it a little bit hazy from your views?
We have a clear sky all the way up right now. Blue skies. I don't see a cloud up there right now. The sun is probably about 10, 15 degrees up. And,
wow.
It's a beautiful day for a launch.
Okay, so the white balances are off a little bit. I think on the camera you're on, I'm seeing a little bit more yellow. the mornings come in and it's changed the entire color range here. So like we were getting a beautiful view off of Sapphire, Rover 2. It's just amazing out there today. Wow. Thank you, Anomalia, for posting the that for us to view. Any other questions? We got 6 minutes left.
I've got a super chat from Foom for $20. Been a long walk. Yes, it has, Foom. Glad to have you with us. Tom Walker, €10. I watched the original moon landing live from Aberdeen, Scotland, and here I am now at age 73. Every bit as nerdy, enjoying your coverage from the most southerly EU member state called Malta. So he's in Malta.
That's a smaller country, but that is an amazing place to be from. There's a question I like to ask every time we have one of these streams. I know the YouTube mods are going to hate me for this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways. I would like everybody to throw in on the stream where they're from and kind of see how fast that gets going here. Just the country. You don't need the exact location, please. But we're going to have a couple of people from Mars. I'm pretty much one of those people, at least for my sleep schedule. So we'll see what we get here.
I've got a couple questions here. 55 Chevy guy, underbar Steve. Which cams will track the launch?
Well, our Black Magic camera here at the Raptor Roost will be tracking the launch. As soon as we see liftoff, we'll be tracking personally. No pressure there.
You did a good job on 15. You should be able to do this one well too, Lab.
Yeah, I love what somebody told Maria once, and she shared with everybody on the tracking with cameras. These beefy cameras on tripods that have fluid mounts and everything, is you put your hand on the top on the lens, and your like for your left hand and your right hand on the post, and you can basically rotate it all the way up as smooth as possible. And that was a really cool technique that I hadn't heard until she had mentioned it. And I got to use that a little bit while I was out there on SN15. But yeah, this is going to be a amazing launch. Fingers crossed on this launch here today.
Thomas, I have another question here from
Yeah.
Zayton. Are both stages going to perform splashdowns, or will Super Heavy attempt the landing? Now, let me take this one a second because there's some back talk that I heard that some people were discussing yesterday. Everything is supposed to land in the water, both the booster and the Starship. So, but one of the concepts people had was keep an eye on what happens with the swing arms and the catch arms to see if they emulate a return to landing situation, to see if that's as a tracking thing, to see if they could have that coordinated. So after the launch, maybe keep an eye on what's happening with the arms.
That would be interesting to see that happen in place. That you'd have the chopsticks trying to basically close over as where they basically would have the booster landing and kind of synced up. That would be quite an interesting thing to watch. One thing that to note on that is that the chopsticks won't go up or down really, except maybe after launch, but they were not going to move up or down visibly, at least the large sections of them, to do a catch. They would basically sit there stationary for the booster, just waiting for it. And then there are basically hydraulic and pneumatic, basically pistons and springs, not really springs, but pistons that will basically do all the dampening of the booster. So it slows it down right at the very end. And that booster should be at a hover, but that's not this booster. That's like 4 boosters from now that we should see that happening. And wow, we've got 14,500 viewers in here. That's beautiful. Any other questions we have on the list? Or
I've got one question here from Christine. Do you think the Launchpad will be ripped apart 90% thrust? I predict 29 engines or less lit.
Well, this one's going to be interesting. We've going to have at least 33 engines attempt to light. Now, let's say one of them has an issue, but they just go ahead. That'll be interesting because it will be, if it hits that point, it would be 32 engines. That would be the most engines ever. So that would be quite a sight here. And it's going to do some interesting damage to the concrete pad, which is called fondag. It's a high thermally resistant compound, or at least it's really good for rockets. They could basically blast it. It's like sandblasting in that point because you're putting so much energy and so much pressure behind it. Think of it this way: the vehicle weighs 5,500 pounds or 5,000 pounds, and it's going to be have a thrust weight ratio of about 1.5, 1.6, somewhere in there. So it's going to be about 7,500 pounds of thrust going down and hitting that concrete. It's just going to chip away at it, and you're going to see some nice little divots. They really do need a water deluge system, a proper one, in order to prevent the long-term damage to infrastructure like that. So they're going to have to go through and either redo or repatch it with a material called martite. It's a 3-part epoxy compound that you mix together to cover up just the little patches. It works really well for NASA for a number of years, and I would expect that they would do the same thing here. It's better than the concrete in a lot of sense. It's usually the thing that holds together while the concrete breaks. At least in the past, that's what we've seen.
Hey, Thomas, I have some super chats I'd like to run through here while we close down.
Oh, and I need to correct my language. I said pounds, and I meant to say tons earlier. Whew. Go ahead, Phila Kid.
Okay, I've got Joe Deckard for $50. Thank you, Joe. Glad this ship is finally happening. Charlottesville, Virginia. I got Teacher in Space, 10 pounds sterling. Just want to hear you guys trying to pronounce my name again. Teacher in Space, I get it right? Bob Nesbitt for $49.99. Thank you, Bob. Dan Kernman, $10 free Stumpy for the launch. And I have a $20 from Stumpy himself. Set me free Stumpy. And
All right,
Mark Shellard, $20. Lab is one of the best people I know. Can't wait. Thank you, gentlemen, and everybody for your donations.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody. Mike Scheller, yeah, wish you could be here with us today. Sure do miss you out here.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and switch over now to the SpaceX stream. So thank you again, everybody who's donated. We're going to continue watching on the stream here. So it's going to be pulling up on your screen shortly. We'll have our own picture-in-picture here as well, so you can basically see a live view, because remember, SpaceX is going to be a bit delayed. So we want to get that live view as well directly of Starship over from Raptor Roost and all the other cameras as we're going through the launch here. This is going to be a spectacular day. I think we're going to go ahead and sign off for the commentary for now, but we will have commentary basically during any holds or any additional spaces at the very end of the launch here where they don't have any commentary. So it's going to be an interesting day, to say the least.
So we will be back, correct, Thomas?
Yes, we will be back. So we're just going to not sign off, but we're going to bow out for now.
Yep, we'll see y'all in a little bit.
We'll be back.
Good morning. You're looking at a live view of Starship as it awaits its first ever integrated flight test from Starbase, Texas, in just a little over from 40 minutes from now. Today, we're hoping to see our Super Heavy booster and Starship spacecraft, collectively referred to as Starship, lift off together for the first time. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kate Tice, Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California.
And I'm Shiva Bharadwaj, a space operations engineer here at SpaceX. Now, as many of you know, Starship is SpaceX's latest and largest vehicle developed to date. It represents a fully reusable transportation system designed to carry both crew and cargo to Earth orbit, the moon, Mars, and beyond.
If you've been following the development of Starship over the last couple of years, you know we've been doing a lot of testing leading up to this big one. Once fully developed, it will be the world's most powerful launch vehicle, with twice the thrust of Saturn V rocket and the ability to carry up to 150 metric tons to orbit. For reference, a 1-liter bottle of water is 1 kilogram, so 150 metric tons is basically 150,000 1-liter bottles of water, or, as I like to think of it, one rather lonely blue whale.
Now, today's test will be the first of many as we work towards transitioning Starship from a developmental to an operational program. Our primary objective today is to gather as much data as we can around the fully integrated vehicles. That means the booster and the Starship and the ground systems. While we have flown Starship in the past, this will be the first attempt of Super Heavy and the first opportunity to validate how the two vehicles operate together.
Any data that we get helps improve the future builds of Starship will be considered a success for the purposes of today's test. Every milestone beyond that is icing on the cake. The further we fly, the more data we can collect. If all goes well, today's flight test could last as long as 90 minutes from liftoff to an expected hard ocean landing for Starship. Whether we end the test with a hard landing or a rapid unscheduled disassembly, or some combination of both, excitement is pretty much guaranteed.
Now, if it does all go well, Super Heavy will fire up its 33 Raptor engines, and it'll lift off from the Launchpad down in South Texas. About 3 minutes into the flight, we're going to hope to see the Super Heavy separate from the Starship spacecraft. It'll then perform a flip maneuver. So there's that. You can see that on your screen. And then it'll boost back in order to make a hard landing in the Gulf of Mexico.
And while that's happening, we hope to see Starship's 6-second stage engines ignite and watch as Starship coasts for about an hour at altitudes ranging between 150 and 250 kilometers before re-entering Earth's atmosphere and make its own hard landing in the Pacific Ocean about 250-ish kilometers offshore.
Now, we are getting great camera views right now, but that's because we are on the launch pad, so we've got umbilicals and connections straight to the vehicle. But we aren't expecting to get very many good views once we get past booster separation.
Yeah, we do promise, though, for any views that we do get, we will share them in real time. We are watching live with you all, so we're excited to see those views ourselves as well.
Now, in a little bit, we are going to take a closer look at the vehicle and the launch pad. But first, today is a super exciting day. Everyone on the teams across Starship have been preparing, doing a number of tests and dress rehearsals for today's launch attempt.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, we saw a nice little recap of those tests in the intro video to today's webcast. For those of you that are following along, you know that many of those tests ended in those rapid unscheduled disassemblies, or RUDs, as we like to call them. And it's been a long road to today. Just in 2022 alone, we had 9 static fires. We've had a couple of wet dress rehearsals. And of course, the launch control team has done numerous simulations as well.
So major shout out to the teams that have been preparing for today's full up integrated test. In fact, we've got a shot of Star Command at the South Texas launch control team. Look at all the people ready for today's launch attempt.
Yeah, that right there is our South Texas Launch Control Center. That is basically ground zero for everything that is happening today, in addition to a couple other control rooms that we have operating as well with operators on console, including the Mission Control Center here behind us here in Hawthorne, California. But with that being said, our very own Zachary Lupin is one of our SpaceX employees at our watch event in South Padre Island. Hey, Zach, how are things going on the ground?
It is a great day for a test launch today, Kate. Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Lupin, and I'm an avionics reliability engineer here at SpaceX, and I'm at the Cameron County Amphitheater, where a growing number of SpaceX employees are gathering to watch what we hope is the first liftoff of a fully integrated Starship. Now, the Starship team has worked incredibly hard for today's launch test. Over the past weekend, teams held a launch readiness review, which included a comprehensive review of all of our vehicle systems, looking at avionics, GNC, communications, software, structures, as well as our Raptor engines and propulsion in general. Now, we are only about 5 miles away from the launch pad, so it's a pretty good view for today. And as we get into as we start to approach T-0, everyone here is clearly very excited for the events that are happening today. So as we get closer to T-0, I'm going to throw it back to Hawthorne to talk more about a rocket.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Zach. And we've actually got a little bit of a crowd forming behind us, too. Now, we've got a shot of Starship on the screen. The entire Starship structure you see is made of stainless steel. And when that's fully stacked, it stands about 120 meters tall and about 9 meters around. To help you give a sense of just how big that is, we've captured a video of some of our teams doing final integration prep work in advance of today's test flight.
Just like Falcon 9, Starship has 2 stages, which we will talk a little bit more about in a minute. But in addition to those 2 stages, Starship actually has a 3rd stage called Stage 0. It consists of all the launch pad infrastructure built around the rocket. You can see a great view of it there on your screen. It's truly an engineering feat in its own right.
And I feel like it's something we don't talk about very often. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into fueling and preparing the launch vehicle before a large test like this, really any launch. Now, let's talk about Super Heavy. The name says it all. It's super, it's heavy, it's super heavy. It goes by some other names, the first stage or the booster, but whatever you call it, the Super Heavy will be the vehicle responsible for powering Starship against that mighty gravitational pull we've got here on Earth. And when it's fully operational, it's going to get Starship to orbit.
The booster alone stands about 70 meters tall and is about the same height as a fully integrated Falcon 9, but with a diameter roughly 2.5 times that of Falcon 9 and with 33 much larger engines.
Yeah, and having those engines, and oh my gosh, I love this shot. We can see looking up into the launch mount at the 33 engines on the booster. Those are each of the Raptor engines that's going to power today's launch attempt.
Yeah, this is an incredible view. One of my favorite views that we're going to get today. We don't have this kind of view on our Falcon 9 launches, so this is so exciting to see. You can even make out the paint markers indicating which engine is which. Like we said, there are 33 of them. So there's a lot of fire that's going to be coming out from those engines in just over 31 minutes from now. As we mentioned before, there are 33 of them on the Super Heavy, the booster, and we don't see it right now, but the cluster in the center are the ones that are actually going to gimbal and help steer the booster back down for its water landing in the Gulf.
Yeah, and they're a little bit different, Kate, than our Falcon engines. So on Falcon, we use a gas generator cycle. Here's a fantastic shot, actually, at the inner stage, so we can see the 6 engines that are on the ship side, 3 gimbaling in the middle, and then the vacuum engines, you can see 2 of them, and the other ones on the other side of the cluster in the middle here. So Raptor's a little bit different. It uses something called stage combustion, which means we basically pre-burn both the fuel side and the ox side, and then get those up to the right temperatures and pressures, and then mix them in the combustion chamber. It allows us to get higher thrust and higher efficiency on these engines than on Falcon 9. Now, Super Heavy also has 4 grid fins to assist with orienting itself during the return back to Earth, as today is the fully integrated flight test, and the first one, we're focusing on safely testing just the fundamental systems and operations on the vehicle. So what that means is we won't be attempting to land on land today. Instead, Super Heavy is going to be making that hard water landing in the Gulf.
Starship, or the spacecraft, is the second stage and makes up the top portion of the vehicle. It's designed for carrying passengers and cargo between destinations on Earth, Earth orbit, and planetary destinations. It stands 50 meters tall, a little taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's comprised of 6 Raptors. We saw those just moments ago. 3 of them are optimized for sea level, and the other 3 are vacuum engines, and they're optimized to operate in the vacuum of space. They provide a maximum of 258,000 tons of thrust in vacuum. The spacecraft is also outfitted with 4 flaps to help aerodynamically control the vehicle's attitude during atmospheric flight and enable precise landing at the intended location. You can see a view of those flaps there.
Now you can see the entire stack is vertical, and that's because Starship is designed for vertical takeoff and landing, as opposed to taking off and landing like an airplane. And that's really important because we don't have runways on the Moon and Mars. Fortunately, gravity at both of those destinations is not nearly as high as it is here on Earth. On Mars, it's about a third of what Earth's gravity is, and on the Moon, the gravity is just a sixth of what it is here. So Starship can take off in both of those cases without needing the super heavy booster like we need here on Earth. Now, for today's test, Starship does not have its landing legs attached, and that's because we aren't going to be attempting to return to the launch site or land on land. It's going to be doing another hard water landing at the end of today's test.
We can't wait. Starship is wrapped in a heat shield, which is composed of 18,000 hexagonal ceramic tiles designed to insulate the vehicle during atmospheric entry, where temperatures can be as high as 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The hex-shaped tiles, like these ones that we have here, roughly make up about 2/3 of the vehicle. There's a couple of different geometries. The one that I have is for the circular portions of the vehicle, so it has this curvature to it, and the one that Shiva has.
Yeah, this kind is a hexagonal shape, and there's several thousand of these all across the body of the vehicle. And it's worth saying we need these because when a spacecraft re-enters from orbital velocity, it's going faster than the speed of sound and causes a lot of heat to build up that has to get dissipated by these heat shield tiles.
Yeah, thing that's really cool about these is they're super lightweight. Even just holding them, we're able to even just hear how hollow they are because of the construction. But they do a great job of dispersing that heat during that atmospheric reentry. We actually produce these in-house at what we like to call the SpaceX bakeries. And they're located in Texas and Florida. So it's something that we designed and build in-house. And like we said, there's thousands of them. You can kind of see them on the exterior of the vehicle. So at this point in time, we are at T-minus 27 minutes and 18 seconds. So let's head on over to John Innsbrucker for an update on the countdown. Hey, John.
Thanks, Kate, and good morning. I'm John Innsbrucker, Principal Integration Engineer here at SpaceX. We're currently loading propellant from the ground system into both the first and second stages. Now, both vehicles use the same 2 propellants. Our fuel is liquid methane at a temperature of just over 100 kelvins, or about minus 272 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a different fuel from Falcon 9, where we use RP1 kerosene. And our oxidizer is liquid oxygen, the same as Falcon 9. But because there's no oxygen in space to support combustion, we have to bring our own. Now, a little bit of a recap. We did the go, no go poll at T-minus 1 hour and 45 minutes. And once the team gave their goes, we polled about 20 folks. We started loading propellants onto the booster at T-minus 1 hour and 39 minutes. And at T-minus 1 hour and 22 minutes, we began propellant loading of the ship, the second stage on Starship. Now, LOX loading of the second stage main tank is almost complete right now, but we'll actually stretch it out and wrap it up and finish at T-minus 5 minutes. And then at T-minus 3 minutes, as the booster finishes loading, the vehicle will be fully loaded with just over 10 million pounds propellant. Now, currently in the countdown, we've just passed the T-minus 26 minute mark. The good news is weather's looking good. You can see the blue skies there on the camera views from the drone. The only thing we're watching is winds. They are within limits at ground level. We expect they may pick up a little bit as we get farther into the window should we need to go that far. But the good news right now is that the weather is looking good. The range also is looking pretty good. We've moved almost all the boats out of the keep out zone overnight. We are working one, but we're still underway. And right now is a reminder, if for any reason we do not make our test flight today, we have backup launch windows. This could be either 24 or 48 hours after today, and it'll depend on how far we get into the countdown. But coming up on 25 minutes to go, everything is looking good, Kate.
In order to make life multiplanetary, we need a fully reusable vehicle that's capable of carrying a huge amount of cargo and a lot of people to orbit and have a pretty quick turnaround. The idea is to effectively reuse launch vehicles just like airplanes. Crowd is getting excited here in Hawthorne behind Mission Control, as you can hear. Now, imagine if you had to wait for a new airplane to be constructed every time you wanted to fly. You'd rarely go anywhere, and it would probably be completely unaffordable for most of us. In order for us to get to Mars and back with lots of people multiple times, reusability is a must.
Now, in the near term and a bit closer to home here on Earth, Starship will be critical to other programs as well. Once it's operational, Starship will deliver the full-size and upgraded version of our Starlink satellites. And that's super exciting because our next generation satellites represent a step forward in Starlink's capabilities and will provide more bandwidth and increased reliability to connect millions of people around the world with high-speed internet.
And of course, Starship will fly a number of human spaceflight missions in the lead up to our first missions to Mars. Entrepreneur and pilot Jared Isaacman will command the first human spaceflight on Starship as part of the Polaris program. Jared served as a commander for Inspiration 4, the first all-civilian mission to orbit. Inspiration 4 launched aboard our Dragon spacecraft and Falcon 9 in September 2021, raising over $240 million for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. The first human spaceflight on Starship will launch as part of the Polaris program, and you can learn more about that series of missions at polarisprogram.com.
Now, our first lunar mission around the moon aboard Starship will be led by Japanese entrepreneur Yusaku Maezawa, also known as NateZ. NateZ flew to space for the first time in December 2021, he purchased all of the seats aboard Starship's first lunar mission in order to give artists and creators from all over the world the opportunity to go. And the hope is that what they will create in space will further inspire all of us here back on planet Earth. Now, over 1 million people applied for this mission, and earlier this year, they announced the final 8 crew members were selected, and you can learn more about them and NateZ's mission at dearmoon.earth.
Dennis and Akiko Tito are the first 2 crew members announced to fly on Starship's second commercial spaceflight around the moon. This will be Dennis's second mission to space after becoming the first commercial astronaut to visit the International Space Station in 2001, and Akiko will be among the first women to fly around the moon on a Starship. The Titos joined the mission to contribute to SpaceX's long-term goal to advance human spaceflight and help make life multiplanetary.
SpaceX is also incredibly honored to be part of NASA's Artemis program to establish a sustainable presence on the moon to prepare for missions to Mars. Starship's early test launches, followed by those regular Starlink deployment missions and propellant transfer demonstrations, are directly advancing NASA's Artemis program, along with SpaceX's ongoing mission to make life multiplanetary.
SpaceX will conduct an uncrewed demonstration mission to the moon prior to the Artemis 3 mission, which will mark humanity's first return to the lunar surface in more than 50 years. It's an exciting future, but let's talk a little about how we got to today.
Now, Starship testing ramped up in July of 2019 with the Star Hopper prototype. It's sort of a short version of the Starship that we see today. There's a picture of it on your screen, the lovable water tower. Now, standing at just over 18 meters tall, the Star Hopper had a single engine and was test flown to perform landing and low-level altitude maneuvers. Starship's initial flight test was a hop that reached about 20 meters in altitude. This was followed by a second hop, the one that we've got on our screen, that rose to 150 meters in altitude. We took a little jaunt away from the launch pad and ended up landing about 100 meters or so further away from it, and you can see that on your screen. Now, notably, this was the first time that we had used a Raptor engine in flight and demonstrated control of this kind.
As a Star Wars fan, I can't not see a flying R2-D2 there. Now, after a series of 150-meter hop tests with earlier prototypes, the Starship program saw a huge breakthrough during a test flight of the vehicle known as serial number 8, or SN8. SN8 demonstrated a first-of-its-kind controlled aerodynamic descent and landing flip maneuver. Yes, I'm talking about the belly flop. This 12.5-kilometer hop test took place December 2020 and saw the SN8 prototype ascend to an altitude of 12.5 kilometers and conduct a belly flop maneuver. While it didn't stick the landing, the test was a major milestone in the development of Starship.
I love seeing the belly flop maneuver. Now, testing continued with the prototype on serial number 9. That was a 10-kilometer flight test in February of 2021. We had a nominal ascent, engine cutoff, reorientation, and controlled descent were stable. However, we unfortunately had a dramatic ending to the end of that flight when we had a failure on its engine to relight. That resulted in one of those rapid unscheduled disassemblies. But what was really, really exciting about both serial numbers 8 and 9 is how quickly we were able to achieve just our primary objectives in those 2 high-altitude test flights. In addition to getting lots of great data, Starship successfully demonstrated control of the vehicle and subsonic re-entry capability.
Ultimately, we performed 9 Starship high-altitude test flights in total, and in May of 2021, SN15 launched from Starbase, reached an altitude of about 10 kilometers, performed a number of maneuvers, and safely returned to the launch site. This was the first Starship prototype to fly, control its descent, safely land, and to be recovered in one piece.
Now, having achieved that success in our suborbital campaign, one of the next big challenges for upper stage reusability is to survive the high heating hypersonic phase of entry. Combined with the ability to refill our Starship's tank with fuel and oxygen while on orbit is what will enable a fully reusable transportation system that's designed to carry both crew and cargo on these long-duration interplanetary flights, and that's ultimately what will help humanity return to the moon and travel to Mars and beyond in our solar system.
So as you can tell, it is nothing but an iterative process to get to the point that we are today and where we will go from here. That iteration is a core process of how we work here at SpaceX. We like to fly and we like to test early and often, both on the side of hardware and software.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, Kate. Now, we are continuing our countdown to Starship liftoff just over 17 minutes from now. So, of course, let's check in with John for another status update. John?
Thanks, Shiva. Clock is coming up on T-minus 17 minutes from liftoff. We're continuing to click towards 0. However, right now, we've just begun listening in. The first stage team is working a pressurization issue. They're troubleshooting that right now. Now, we do have the option, if need be, if we can't solve this, then we would hold the count and probably treat today as a wet dress and not be able to launch. However, we are continuing to do propellant loading on both the Super Heavy and the ship stages. Now, most recently, we began loading liquid oxygen and methane fuel into the header tanks on Starship. At the very top, just underneath the nose there are 2 small spherical tanks. That's where the fuel and liquid oxygen header tanks are. That started at T-minus 27 minutes, and that propellant loading will continue until T-minus 9 minutes. We'll also continue loading the main tanks of the Starship second stage, although they're pretty much full right now. Everything will drain back as we get ready for launch at T-minus 5 minutes. Now, on the first stage, we're continuing to load the massive amount of propellant onto the Super Heavy booster. That's going to continue until T-minus 3 minutes. You can see the frost line on some of the views as both liquid methane and liquid oxygen go into the tank. It's 16 minutes and counting. We're also currently configuring the launch pad for liftoff. The booster hold downs are being prepared for the release at liftoff, and the second stage quick disconnect is beginning its configuration for release. The liquid oxygen and methane that are going into the second stage go through that quick disconnect. You can see it in some of the views, the arm that comes out just to the base of the second stage. Now it'll move out of the way as we lift off. the same time, the SpaceX team continues to check in with the Coast Guard. We're working one boat that's in the safety perimeter. They are working to get that boat out of the way. We cleared several other boats out overnight. We're down to one, and we expect that'll be clear so that we can proceed with launch out over the Gulf of Mexico. But as a reminder, T-minus 15 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. We are working an issue on the first stage, and we'll bring an update as we get more insight into that issue.
Now, today's test flight is taking place out of our Starbase facility in South Texas, and that facility has gone through a tremendous amount of change and growth in a really short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago, not much even existed there. It was a very different scene, as you can see by that photo there on your screen. Fast forward to today, and the team is building out an entire production line.
Yeah, last year they built 4 Starship Superheavy boosters, 5 Starships, our 200 Raptor 2 engine, and this year they're targeting 5 boosters, 8 Starships in production for 2023. And really, you do need a production system to rapidly iterate, like we were talking about earlier, on the design of the vehicle as we learn more about it from these large tests.
Yeah, absolutely. Pulling on my industrial engineering background, system fill is something that is critical to that goal. Being able to produce and launch multiple Starships means that we have to have a system full of those production vehicles, and we iterate on each one. So even the next Starship that will fly in whatever the next test is will be different than the one that you see there on your screen now.
Now, the employees who have been at SpaceX a while say that Starbase does remind them of the early Falcon 1 days, except moving a whole lot faster.
The team at Starbase is expanding as fast as the facilities are, and if you've ever wondered what life at Starbase is like, here's a quick. Starbase directly employs more than 1,800 employees and is actually the largest employer in the area.
Yeah, and from that video, you can really tell, like, it's a beautiful location. It's close to the ocean. There's tons of wildlife. And that's because being close to the equator is actually a fantastic way to get to orbit.
Yeah, I love that we have so many employee events that allow us to participate with ocean cleanup and other environmental efforts there. We'd also like to thank Cameron County for being so supportive for all of our work in that area. Now, in addition to Starbase, we'll soon be adding another Texas location to the SpaceX family. We're opening a new facility in Bastrop, Texas, just outside of Austin, to support Starlink hardware production. The new facility will be over 500,000 square feet of manufacturing space, and the team has already started hiring.
Now, we have all kinds of openings in production and manufacturing for technicians and leadership and manufacturing engineers and all kinds of site support roles. Basically, if you can think of a role, we're probably hiring for it.
So if you're interested in helping expand human life to other planets or helping internet access here on Earth, consider becoming part of the SpaceX team at spacex.com/careers. Now, with that, let's check back in with Zach down at Starbase one last time before launch. Howdy, Zach.
Hello, Kate and Shiva again. You can really feel the energy here at South Padre Island as more of the SpaceX team have gathered. We're standing just over 5 miles away from the launch mount, and so from here we've got a very nice view. I would basically say these are some of the best front row seats you could get, and might I add, beachside as well. Now, the Starship team has worked incredibly hard to get ready for this test, and we're all clearly excited for T0. And as we get into the final moments, one issue that could hold the countdown or cancel the test altogether is if a boat enters the safety perimeter. Now, over my shoulder is the Gulf of Mexico, which is normally very open to all of the boaters and fishers. However, today, SpaceX is closely coordinating with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safe zone and ensure public safety. And up to T0, SpaceX is in regular communication with the Coast Guard to ensure there are no boats in the area leading up to the launch. Now, fingers crossed that does not happen. Now, I'll throw it back to the folks at Hawthorne as we get closer and closer to that T-0. To all of the boaters and fishers, however, today, SpaceX is closely coordinating with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safe zone and ensure public safety. And up to T0, SpaceX.
We're just inside T-9 minutes and counting. We're listening on one of the background loops right now. Flight director is talking about the issue we've had on first stage, working the pressurization system. Decision right now is that we are going to stop the launch for today. We're going to transition the launch attempt to a wet dress rehearsal. So that means we're going to continue with the countdown sequence of events. We'll continue loading propellant, finishing up here shortly on the second stage. We'll also continue loading propellant onto the first stage, wrapping up at T-3 minutes. We're also going to go through pressurization steps, other steps of the countdown. This will be a full validation for the team, but currently the plan right now is we're waiting for final word, is that I think at T-10 seconds, we will finally stop the clock and then recycle the countdown for today. Now we're inside T-8 minutes and counting. We're continuing to load propellant on both the first and second stage. You can see the Starship second stage with the heat shield tiles there. Carriage arms are open. You can see the condensation around the first stage tank as we load liquid methane and liquid oxygen into the large super heavy first stage. Now that propellant loading is continuing until T-3 minutes. As a reminder, and there's our great view looking up at the Raptor engines, the 33 engines. There's an outer ring of 20 engines, and then there's an inner set of 13. Those are the engines that can gimbal and adjust the course of the Starship vehicle on the way up. And of course, the first stage as it comes back down towards the water landing in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, when both stages are loaded, you can see the condensation frost on the side of the first stage. We'll have just over 10 million pounds of liquid propellant on board. Inside T-7 minutes, we're continuing to count. Team is preparing for the hold and scrub at T-10 seconds. Now, the good news is everything's been going good. We're just working that one issue. So we are continuing to count. Team will get this as an excellent opportunity to run the end-to-end of the system. Now, in a launch, in the next few minutes, the guidance system would be performing its final alignment. We will be doing that this morning. The automated flight termination system would be armed. We won't need to arm it today as we won't be flying. And we'll do final thrust vector control checkouts, what we call wiggles of the Raptor engines on the first and second stages. Now, normally in a countdown, if we needed to hold, there's a view of the second stage Raptor engines just above the first stage. Now, as I mentioned, in a regular countdown, if we needed to hold, that would come at T-40 seconds. That's the point in the countdown where we can pause to wait for final checkouts or pressurization to complete. Now, earlier this morning, we thought we might have to hold at 40 seconds. Everything's looking good, except for the one pressurization issue that the team is going to have to troubleshoot after this morning. So we won't stop at 40 seconds right now. We'll continue all the way down to 10 seconds, and then we'll go into a recycle.
John, you mentioned that we're going to be jumping into a wet dress rehearsal here, and I actually
now
think
we're coming up T-minus 5 minutes. Overall, though, Kate, Shiva, it's been a good day. It's a little sad listening to the flight director say that we're going to have to stop at 10 seconds. But I guess that's for everybody. It gives us a real run-through of the launch vehicle.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Of course, we wanted to see fire today and lift off, but that's okay. The point of the countdown is to allow the teams to progress to that T0 time in a coordinated fashion and really to unveil any issues prior to the ignition sequence. So the countdown did its job today. It allowed us to identify that press issue, and like John mentioned, the teams are going to work through it, and we are going to basically call it off at T-minus 10 seconds. But the integrated launch teams and us, we are going to treat this as if it were still a launch day. We're going to do this, what we now call a wet dress rehearsal.
Yeah, and we've mentioned the term a couple of times here. We call it a wet dress rehearsal because we are wetting the propellant tanks. We are loading propellant into the vehicle. We've talked about the frost line a little bit here. That exercises the stage 0 system, the ground system, all of our infrastructure that loads propellants onto the pad. That exercises our procedures for the mission control teams. We're monitoring telemetry on the mission control consoles, looking at the pressures and the rates and the temperatures. And some of those things look a little bit different when you're getting up to the pre-flight pressurization levels and full propellant load. So we're learning things today about the integrated tests that are going to set us up for success in a future attempt later on, hopefully in the next 48 hours or so. And Kate, like it's also worth mentioning here, we're still going to take the count through to a pretty around the T-minus 10 second mark. So we're really going to exercise everything that we would up until that point in the vehicle states and ground procedures.
Yeah, it's like we said before, any data that we can collect today is super helpful. And that's exactly what we're doing. We are continuing to collect this data and allow the teams to have be better informed for the next attempt. Unfortunately, due to the needing to recycle the propellant, we are looking at a minimum of 48 hours until we are able to attempt this flight test again. So we're not quite sure what that timing will be at the moment, but we're looking at a minimum of 48 hours at this point in time. But Shiva, exactly as you said, things look a little bit different on launch day. And we allowed the countdown to do its job, to basically get to this point, to allow the teams to work through the issues. And we're going to continue, like we said before, we're going to continue all this down all the way to T-minus 10 seconds. And that will really allow the teams to pretend like this is launch day and continue and gather that data.
Yeah, Kate, on the one hand, it's a little bittersweet. On the other hand, we watched them go all the way through. First stage propellant load, just now wrapping up. The second stage, even the header tanks up under the nose of the Starship that you can see on the monitors. Actually, that all went very well today. The weather was excellent. Everything was looking good. Sadly, we just have the one issue, but that is letting the team continue to count down. And we're going to continue with it here until we get the clock hold at T-minus 10 seconds.
Yeah, so for those of you that have just joined us, we're now at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds to what would have been the launch of our Starship flight test. But unfortunately, due to a stage 1 issue, we are going to utilize today as a wet dress rehearsal. Instead, we are not going to attempt launch. The teams are basically saying that we're scrubbing our launch attempt for today, and we are expecting a minimum of 48 hours in order to recycle. So it's all good news, though. There's nothing really to be sad about other than we had hoped to be able to lift off today, but that's okay.
Now, one thing to point out for folks, when we do come back, when we clear this and we fly, one of the things you'll hear in the last minute, you won't be hearing us because we'll be listening to the countdown. But at T-minus 30 seconds, that's when the flight director would give the final go for launch. Love to have heard that this morning, but it's something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
The other thing to look at is at T-minus 6 seconds, we begin lighting the engines. Up on your monitor, you can see there, T-minus 40 seconds. We did hit the 40-second hold point, and they are holding for a moment. In the end, they will release that hold. We'll go the last 30 seconds. But yes, when we do get to day of launch, the last thing to look at is in the last 6 seconds, light the Raptor engines in succession. So unlike Falcon 9, we're going to have to do that a little longer. We're hearing right now the clock is going to hold here at T-minus 40 seconds. The Super Heavy and Starship are looking good. So with that, Kate, it's been a fast-paced morning. We got through it fairly quickly. But at this point, we're going to have to call it a morning.
Yeah, that's right. So for those of you that have recently just joined us, we unfortunately had a hold on the countdown today, and that is going to scrub our launcher tabs. But we are expecting a minimum of 48 hours in order to recycle. So be sure to keep an eye on our social channels, and we'll share information as soon as it becomes available. Until then, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
And welcome back. So this is Thomas again. With me, I have Phila Kid.
Hey, Thomas, what a disappointment this morning, huh?
I know, Nate.
Yeah, it looked like everything was a go until right there at the last couple of minutes, and so I guess we got to wait 2 days.
Yeah, Steven, how does it look from your view and lab? How does it look for you guys?
It's a shame to waste the good weather. My first impression.
It won't be as good on Thursday.
I think it should be a Wednesday launch if it's 48 hours from now. But the one good thing that could come out of it, I know that Mauricio from RGV is doing a flyover here today. So as soon as that TFR that comes up, he's going to do a flyover and be able to get a full stack view and a clear pad, and it's going to be the most bizarre view for Starbase because it's going to be the cleanest on anything. No cars, pretty much nothing, or at least very little of that for this today. So there is a little bit of solace that we can get some interesting photos that are going to be quite beautiful. We have obviously done a wet dress rehearsal today. At this point, it's basically everything up to lighting the engines and launching it. So that's just one of those things where it's just unfortunate we haven't seen anything more. I wanted to see those Raptors ignite at least, but today it didn't turn out that way. So what we heard from SpaceX on their stream and the additional information on Twitter was that there was a valve issue, I believe, on the first stage that caused a pressurization issue that they were dealing with, and that looks like it's something that we'll have to probably physically manipulate and change out either the valve or just get it to break free. Because one issue with a lot of valves, there's like a 0.018 something percent failure rate where they just do not open or close, and there's enough valves there that you can come up with that issue quite often. So you typically will go through and test the whole system, the valves work, but then you start doing cryo, and the thermal expansion contraction just kind of messes around with that a little bit more. And so you will still have some failures with valves not opening and closing the way you expect them to. So unfortunately today was a scrub due to, it sounds like, a valve issue on the first stage. Phila Kid, Nate.
Yeah, I was just looking at the weather for the upcoming days. It's just too bad that we couldn't see it launch today. That SpaceX couldn't make it happen because Wednesday is supposed to be a really cloudy day, and so just such a beautiful day. It would have been a perfect day to get this thing in the air if they were able.
Yeah, and they've got so many people that came out to view it today as well. It's going to be kind of tough. It's like, oh, everybody got up early, everybody's ready for it to happen, but it didn't happen. And this is actually not unexpected. Typically, most launches at the first initial run at these things, for especially a massive complex vehicle like this, there will be a complex issue that arises where if this doesn't get resolved, it would end in a potential failure. There is that potential. So you want at least the the success rate to go up. We don't want to see this run off of the launch pad or mid-flight or something because of this valve issue. So I'm glad that we are actually recycling and doing it again another day, and we actually get 2 days of rest now. So that's good for us viewing and those of you who tuned in. I believe we'll do basically the same thing as far as commentary again next time. But while we still have you all, we can go through and do a lot more. So there's questions that you can answer, ask and we can answer. So you can type at questions, and they will be able to be basically trickled in from YouTube. So that's where you want to type those in, and we will discuss them here and have some other topics that we can bring up. Sounds good?
Hey, Thomas, I have some super chats. I've got Astro CJ42, $20. Thanks at Lob Padre for all you do for us. I've got Nick for $5. Smash that like button. Thanks to all you've done, Lob Padre. And I've got Liverpool Ed, £10 sterling. Thanks for everything, Lab. Hit the like button, guys.
Thank you all very much. Y'all are awesome. Thank you all for hanging out with us today. As much as it hurts me to see this scrub happen, I was expecting it to happen. So it was expected.
Yeah, it was a little bit harder to hear you, Lab, but I from what I could hear, you said it. Unfortunately, it has scrubbed today. You were expecting this, yeah, these are one of these unfortunate events. We've had it happen multiple times in the past. Last year, or I'm sorry, 2 years ago, when I was there present with you for SN15, the first round was a scrub. They basically did another round. It finally launched on May 5th. And so this was a really great attempt for us today, at least for the full stack of Starship, with its potential maiden flight here now in 48 hours. We will wait patiently, and that's kind of what we've been doing for the past 2 years anyways, but it's exciting every moment of it to find that potential that SpaceX and Starship will be able to give to us. As humanity, we want to be able to go through and be a multiplanetary species. We want to see that like Star Trek future, that dream that this will be able to provide that promise for us. So I'm really excited to see this today, that even though we've scrubbed, we've gotten a lot better information about how these things work. And it was really interesting to listen on the commentary as well from SpaceX and learn some a little bit of additional information here and there. Got some great views that we're able to go through and analyze on the fly, and had some a couple of revelations. I think Zach from CSI Starbase was looking at some stuff and was like, "Oh, hey, you got some interesting flex lines here that shouldn't be there." So keep an eye out for people giving out interesting details like that. We will continue actually to go through and look at all the details as well, even afterwards in our own Discord. So if you do !Discord in the chat, you'll be able to join, and there's a free voice section, and a lot of the channels are actually free, but we also have paid membership channels that have additional perks. So that's another area you can check out. But for now, do we have additional questions and other things we want to go over, gentlemen?
I have some questions, and I have some new members. Let me go through the new members first. Chris Pankey, Dean Bath, Ben Watson, John Doan, Insight Mediation Houston, P 2.0.
Thank you all very much. A special shout out to John Doe, my brother from South Padre Island. Thank you for watching and hanging out with us.
And with lab hot micing there from Raptorus, here's a question from some Dave guy. Is there an approximate cost of full stack What is the approximate cost of a full stack Starship?
Well, this was a question that was asked to Elon yesterday. He didn't directly answer it. So the one problem that you have is if you just said this Starship, how much does it cost for it and all the starships that came before it to get it up to this point? It's going to be all of the R&D costs for the Raptor development program, every basically dollar and cent to basically get it to this stage, which it's not quite the accurate description. A better description is how much does it cost to manufacture a vehicle? That might be a better question. And so the answer would probably be the equivalent of what would be the stainless steel, the man-hour labor parts of building the vehicle, and you basically count those as the cost. So R&D would basically get split between all of the vehicles and all of the launches, and that's what you would basically have to divide it up with that part. So Elon had talked about this, probably 2019, maybe a bit earlier. He said that the Starship program was probably going to cost them around $10 billion. I think that we're actually getting pretty close to that point. So you'd have to take all of the Starship launches in the future, divide up every launch for that R&D cost. So you basically have to go through and arbitrarize your costs here with each launch. And that would be including that reusable launch, not just, hey, every single first launch. No, it's every little launch that they do. You have to go through and divide up those costs. And Elon did say that the propellant for basically doing one of these, they will get it down to about $2 million. So you have to always add that into the cost as well. I went through and looked at some of the pricing about looking at the employees and the cost of the materials at Starbase just to get a ballpark number. And I came up to about 25 million. And that's on the cheap end. But you're talking about just some of the materials. But you're not talking about some of the other things like the Raptors. So each Raptor costs, what was it? Down to $250,000 each. So that was the one number that we were tracking before. You have to multiply that by 33 for the booster. At first 6 for the Starship, and then go to 9 eventually. So we will see, those costs as well added into it. So there is quite a bit that you have to kind of add up to get to a kind of a ballpark number, but it's not quite there yet for all the details because there's some interesting missing parts. It's a lot of speculation from my end, as well as just what Elon and SpaceX has said in the past. A lot of those numbers are going to be very proprietary, especially for the cost of the total Starship. And I don't think Elon or SpaceX will answer that for quite a while until they actually bring down the costs. And one of the best things is that they are going into high manufacturing rates eventually with Starship. Elon has said publicly that they are going to do a ship build each month, and that's pretty much going to be with a booster because the first ones aren't going to be fully reusable for a while. And then you're going to do one every 3 days. So, that is the rate which you are mass producing Starships and some of the boosters, but you're reusing the boosters mostly. And you're just building more and more Starships because the boosters can get reused one every, 5 hours, he said, or something like that. Eventually he wants it down to an hour. You want to be able to reset in 1 hour to launch the booster. That's the engineering goal. I'm not sure if we're ever going to hit that goal with SpaceX, at least the way they're doing these things, because it's similar to Falcon 9. They said they wanted to get it down to a engineering goal of being able to turn around a Falcon 9 as quickly as possible, but we still haven't quite hit that mark yet because it's just extra time for refurbishment. But they're at that point right now. They're like the aviation industry. They have such rapid cadence. They're doing, Elon said, 4 or 1 every 4 days for Falcon 9. So we will eventually see that point. All those costs will basically be brought down to the point where it's basically the costs of propellant and the operations. That's one I think he's kind of leaving out, but you're looking at the people going through checking the vehicle and that will be the eventual cost for each launch. Would be operations, the propellant, and then they will have additional costs they will add to basically recoup those losses from R&D and that kind of thing later on. Any additional questions, Phila Kid?
Yes, I do. A question that came in before the launch that we didn't get to, but will come up again. Is everyone safe in case of a pad explosion? And that's the direct connection to the exclusion zone.
Yes. We have everybody cleared away. There was a boat that had migrated into the exclusion zone. SpaceX had quickly, made contact with that boat, or the Coast Guard made quickly contact with that boat and has subsequently removed it from the hazard area. So the vehicle is still in a unsafe state. It is fully propped and loaded with methane and oxygen of the liquid variety. So there's quite a bit there. And they did go through and notify them. And the only other people that are really the closest people are at Raptor Roost. So, Lab, how safe do you guys feel over there? Or Steven, either one of you would be fine.
Yeah, we're doing I don't.
Actually, Lab, we can barely hear you. There's a lot of wind. Steven?
How about there now? You got me now?
No, you're still really, really windy. And
So, Steven, how do you hear me?
You sound perfect. Lab has got quite a bit of wind there. So how safe do you guys feel over there at Raptor Roost?
I feel pretty safe. I think both SpaceX and the FAA have analyzed where any debris could fall if the thing blows up on the pad or explodes in flight. And of course, the rocket has the flight termination system. That's a critical safety element to autonomously destroy the vehicle, to blow it up if there's any major problem that's going to threaten any people or third-party property. So, yeah, I feel safe 3.9 miles away.
Yeah, the only property that's in danger is their property right now. So we're all sounding okay here. Just watching everything else going on at Raptor Roost, and that looks beautiful now. Very clear day, not a cloud in the sky, pretty much. So, what other questions do we have here, Phila?
Back to the safety question. When you and I were at Raptor Roost on the flight of SN15, neither of us felt really safe once it went into the clouds because we didn't know where the rocket was, and it was loud.
Yeah, it was so directly above us that it literally sounded like it was right above us, not like 4 miles over and above us. No, it was like right above us, so we couldn't see a thing. And I was like eyeing the stairs and eyeing my friend Chuck, and like, okay, if this thing suddenly makes some really weird turns or something, I'm gonna have to grab Chuck and see if I can grab him towards the stairs here. But that was just because I could not see it at the time, and that was quite an interesting thought to have happen. What were your thoughts at the time when it was launching?
Exactly the same thing. And then, but as it started to come down and it got quiet after the rocket shut off, it was eerier. And then once the rocket refired, you could tell that it was further away. But that silence as it was doing the free fall was kind of terrifying to me to it.
With that Phila Kid, that silence, you get used to the roar for those first few minutes, and it kind of becomes normal. And then when it goes silent, it's like, uh-oh, what happened?
So, Lab, I think I figured out might be what's the issue on your end. I'm having a hard time hearing you, and I think it's that you have your microphone being inputted to Discord on a different microphone. So that might be the issue there.
All right.
So, because what I'm hearing from you is you're kind of quite distant from the microphone. But yeah, so there's a slight technical issue there, but everything else has been turning out really good today. We've got picture-in-picture. We've been able to switch out the views, even go to the SpaceX live stream. A lot of work has been going into that, and it's just been beautiful today. Thank you so much for production team for doing that for us.
Well, I do have a couple questions. Robert Wells, what happened to the valve? Of course, we don't know. What's your speculation on that, Thomas?
I think it's just a sticky valve. It happens a lot more often with the ground support equipment, but this could be inside the booster itself. There's going to be plenty of valves in there. And they were saying it was a pressurization issue. So either it's being left open or being left closed. So the danger is if it's closed and you have, let's say, a submerged pipe, it could basically have the issue that it collapses because the pressure inside is too low. But it really depends on what it is exactly that it is and where it is. All we know, it is just a valve on the first stage, and it's really probably going to take just a person out there with a little bit of a mallet, bump it, and it's going to open right up. That's typically what happens. There's sometimes a little bit of water that gets on the valve themselves, so they basically get kind of frozen, stuck to be like in a solid position that it's just not going to rotate out of the way. A lot of these are butterfly valves, so I just don't know exactly which one this would be, because they kind of left it vague on which one, but at least we know it is a valve on the first stage. Sounds like it's the the LOX tank specifically.
Well, one of the things, we haven't seen, talking about vehicle safety at this point, we haven't seen any tank purging like they normally have done. It looks like they're holding pressures on the tank, because we don't really see, I don't think we're really seeing any de-tanking per se, because I think they're trying to hold pressure on it and maybe doing some testing at this point.
Yeah.
Nothing appears to, none of the frost lines appear to have dropped, and it appears to be at 100% full.
Yeah, so that's what I'm seeing as well. You can see condensate off the vehicle. So one of the things that you have to look for is not the ice, which is the white part, but it's the condensate, which is the clouds forming off the vehicle. That is the biggest giveaway and telltale sign that there is cryo there, because one of the things that can happen is the skin can still be cold and there could be ice on it, but the cryo is several feet down or rings down. So each ring is about 6 feet. And it will basically be beyond where you think it is. It'll basically be halfway empty and it still has ice at the top. And you start to see that, it's starting to thaw. They're starting to detank. No, they've detanked long ago, or started detanking long ago. And so, watching that condensate is a huge element. And bringing it back to what you were talking about earlier, is that they're keeping it full at this point, I think, to do the wet dress rehearsal, to say, well, this issue that we're having with the valve, can we go ahead and keep trying different procedures, come up with new procedures, in fact, to try to mitigate this issue? Because if this happens again 48 hours later, even if they've fixed the valve issue, there might be another issue that's similar to it, where they have a procedure now that will allow them to correct for that. So it's always an interesting thing. So, Stephen, you were present for the SLS launch, correct? So what was your impressions on what they did for the procedures on that?
Well, they certainly had to do a lot of trial and error. So they ran through, I think, if my memory serves, 3 wet dress rehearsals for the SLS. And then, of course, they had a scrubbed launch attempt where they fully loaded the vehicle, or they tried to fully load the vehicle, and they ran into another valve problem with the hydrogen loading system. So it was a lot of trial and error, and eventually they settled on a new way to load the hydrogen into the core stage by kind of adjusting the flow rate into the vehicle from the ground storage tank to make sure that it doesn't unseat the seal in the what they call the tail service mast umbilical, which is the umbilical connection at the bottom of the core stage with the launch platform. So valves and connections and seals are a pesky problem for space vehicles, and it's definitely, if I had to guess what would cause a scrub for a first launch of something like the Starship, a valve would have been near the top of my list, because virtually every major space program, SpaceX, NASA, other legacy aerospace contractors have had problems with valves in my career covering them.
Yeah, it seems that it's almost 1% failure rate of valves. So you have to go through and say all the valves they have, if they have 100 of them, one of them is going to have an issue. Sometimes it can be resolved, sometimes it's not, until you go out there and hit it with a hammer, really, or replace parts. Sometimes leaky valves. I think the red team, specifically at the SLS, went out and there was a leak that they had, and they were able to basically tighten it up and use a wrench to do that, and they were pretty much done. They had a whole procedure list just for that one particular issue.
Exactly. Yeah, that was quite a moment to see the team go out to the pad. Those 3 technicians with the fully loaded SLS full of hydrogen. Pretty interesting moment.
I think at that point you're getting some hazard pay for that for sure. But it's pretty safe for those guys up to a point. There's always potential issues, but it was quite interesting to see. I know that SpaceX has their own version of the red team. I don't know what they call them, but we see these trucks go out at the pad sometimes when it still has prop or other cryogenics in the vehicle, and they will adjust the valves specifically on the fuel farm. So it's quite an interesting comparison there. We obviously didn't see any of those guys come out today, but the issue seems to be inside the vehicle and not, a ground surface or serviceable ground equipment, for instance.
Thomas, I have a question for you. Actually,
Yeah.
Any idea where on the booster on the Super Heavy this valve may be located? Do you know, or anyone else on the team? And would this potentially require a D-stack or anything like that?
So what it would probably be, if I'm guessing right, would be a valve that would not be just the. It's actually one of many valves, but if it's going to be one of the valves, I think it would be. It would probably be on the top of the vehicle as far as the LOX tank, or actually the midsection. So I didn't see one of the valves open up today for basically venting, and that would be very useful. So if it's that pressurization issue, it's like it's not able to open up a valve just to detank or depressurize. That would be a big problem to have if the vehicle's starting to overpressurize and you need more flow. That's going to be an issue. There's valves up there. That kind of is one of my more likely suspects because it is a butterfly valve, and it would be the towards the beach side. I suspect, because I haven't seen any real venting coming off in that direction. Otherwise, it would have to be at the bottom of the tank, where like 90% of the other valves are.
Well, Thomas, the other thing is if it's a pressurization issue, we don't know whether it's an overpressure or an underpressure. So it could be a leaky valve, which we haven't seen any exhaust from, or it could be a stuck valve that would hold in pressure, which gave them too high a pressure temperature or pressures. And at the same time, if it's overpressure, I'm sure there's pressure relief pop valves that would also depressurize the vehicle if the overpressures got too high. So I'm sure they've got backup on the valves. It's just that they don't want to fly with one valve that's not functioning properly. Doesn't meet the safety criteria to have one of the valves not working, possibly.
Yeah, so one thing I've noticed, for instance, the 31 engine static fire they opened up the basically the vents on the vehicle pretty much immediately and kept them open the entire time. And that was because the autogenous pressurization lines that were running up there were providing, I think, way more pressure than they really thought they were going to get and could handle. And so it was just opening up the main tanks and just like dumping all that out until it was into a satisfactory pressure, because that's one of those issues that you don't want to have, is really overpressurization or a collapse. Those are the two what you don't have, but the overpressurization is, I think, a potential issue. And that's something Elon had talked about, was specifically pressure on the vehicle. He was worried about some of that. That's one of the things he mentioned in the Spaces last night. I don't remember the exact words he said. Either of you recall what he'd mentioned, Nate or Phila Kid? I think you were there for it.
I don't remember exactly what he said either, Thomas. I remember him talking about it.
Yeah, I can't recall either myself. I was in and out of that listening last night.
Okay.
Right.
Stephen, did you happen to catch that last night? The call that he had, which was the Twitter Spaces call?
I was able to listen to some of it. I was actually not listening live, but one of my colleagues did provide a recording. Do you have any questions about it?
Yeah. So specifically, there was a something Elon brought up about pressurization issues of the vehicle. That was one of his main concerns, and I can't remember the exact wording or exactly what he was talking about on the pressurization issue. And that kind of has come up today, which is interesting, but it wasn't the same issue. This is not in flight, because I remember that was what he was talking about.
I remember if Stephen doesn't.
I think he said something about using methalox for pressurization, not helium, and it was tough to keep the pressurant or that gas from liquefying in the tanks. He said something about that, if I recall correctly.
Yes, Ullage collapse. Yeah.
Yes, he was worried about it condensating back into a liquid because of it being so cold. That's what it's going to want to do. And I think his major concern he kind of expressed was relighting the Raptors on the booster, having the pressure they needed from the Ullage to actually get those engines relit, both during, I guess, reentry and when they wanted to simulate the landing in the Gulf.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Because I couldn't remember. It was basically the Ullage collapse, which is the gas wants to reliquefy, and it basically drops that pressure. And since there's no pressure, you cannot push enough propellant into the lines of the engines, and they are starved to death, and they start eating themselves. They start doing cavitation inside of the I guess you could call them like impellers, but basically the turbo pumps will basically do this thing called cavitation, where air bubbles start to form because it's such a low pressure environment now. And they just start chipping away and eating at that, and destroys the Raptors very quickly.
It's amazing to think about it. And a lot of people just don't realize in that kind of a system what cavitation will do. I mean, it really will. It will just, bubbles will destroy those alloys they've created, as strong as they are. It's pretty incredible to think about.
Yeah, in some of the cases, for like an instance like this, where you have pumps and other systems, it's a little bit better to have higher pressure than you expect than it is for it to be lower than you want it. Because in this case that he's talking about, it would just either not light properly, or it would just blow up because it's eating the engine itself. So it's engine rich at that point. And so you start to see green flames, or just the entire thing just blows off. And I would never want to see that happen again. We kind of did a little bit with SN8. We saw green flames coming out of that when it went to do its landing, and we're like, whoa, that's not supposed to happen. That's a lot of copper coming off of the lining of the jacket. And we even saw that one of the engine bells knocked into the other one. We had to look at the footage again, and it was trying to compensate for the engine that went out. And that engine that went out did not move out of the way. It was like, hey, I turned off. I'm going to stay where I'm at. And that was the end of the engine right then and there.
Hey, Thomas, how's my mic now?
Sounds amazing, Lab. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. I wanted to mention earlier, I'm not sure if y'all mentioned our other great commentator, Golden Boy, Zach. He was, and that's Zach with a K. He actually got to talk with Elon and ask him a couple of questions, or ask him a question. I believe he asked him what was it, the worst part?
What was the hardest part I remember that question.
What was the hardest part of everything out here? And he mentioned that the building of the GSE farms, and he mentioned that building their own tanks was a big mistake.
In some ways, I agree with it. In some ways, I disagree with it. It's funny because we figured out the issue, or at least an idea of what the issue was, based off of what Phila Kid was able to find, specifically on Texas Railroad Commission documents, which is the authority that would basically govern all the licensing or the restrictions of how you build these things. So basically the building code. And the issue was about 6 feet. They needed a wall and 6 feet difference between the methane tanks and everything else. And that was their real main issue. And that's why they had to put in the horizontal methane tanks. And I loved Elon's description of them, the hot dogs. because they do
Yeah.
look a lot like hot dogs.
They do. And I have a lot of people ask me and wonder why they put it so close to the launch pad. And, just from like a bird's eye view from Google Maps or whatever, it looks like it's like right there. And I guess logistically speaking, it is, but it is a hike. If you were to walk from the launch pad to the farm, it is a little bit of a hike still, but it is kind of strange that it is so close.
Could it be so close because of just the availability of land for them to build on at the time with what the Army Corps gave them and allowed them to build? Because, this started out as a Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy situation that they kind of morphed into a Starship situation even before they totally had the green light to do it.
Yeah, they are kind of enclosed around the wildlife refuge around here, so they had limited room to work with. I think over the past couple of years, they've expanded just a little bit, and they're continuing to try to expand and work with a wildlife refuge, see if they can obtain a little more property to expand out.
Yeah, so for a quick measurement here, the distance between the launch table and the orbital fuel farm, the first tank that is the closest, you're looking at about 310 feet or about 94 meters. So it's shorter than the Starship is tall. But the interesting thing is that you want to get as minimum of a distance as possible because you want to keep your cryogenics as cooled as possible. So one thing that they have to do is they are dumping cryogenics outside of the launch table in order to chill down the lines. That's one of the procedures they do in order to basically bring down the what I call thermal mass, but the massive amount of heat that are in the ground. That it's just ambient ground temperatures of 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. But it's a huge difference between that and the negative 400 something degrees Fahrenheit that you need to be, which would be like negative 270, I believe, in Celsius, in order for those cryogenics to basically stay a liquid. So you have to make those closer. I know that Stephen, you've been over to obviously a lot of launches over at the Cape in Florida. What's the normal distance that you think the pipes and the lines have to run through for all of the vehicles over there?
Well, certainly the footprint geographically of the launch pad for a vehicle the size of Starship is much smaller than a typical launch pad at the Cape. Like, if you look at Launch Complex 39A, it's I think it's nearly a half mile in diameter from perimeter to perimeter, and the tanks are a quarter mile from the launch pad for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, and same for the Space Launch System over at 39B. And the other launch pads, like 40 and 41 for Falcon 9 and ULA, are a bit smaller, but those vehicles, obviously Falcon 9 and like Atlas 5, are maybe half the height approximately of the Starship, and the launch pads are, I would estimate, twice the size in terms of geographic area.
Real quick, Stephen, if you could give a little explanation for some of the people that don't know a whole lot about cryogenics, why they need to keep the engines and the system so cool, and about the boiling points of the fuel.
Yeah. So methane and liquid oxygen both, of course, are cryogenic fluids, and at ambient temperature in the atmosphere, natural gas or oxygen will be in a gaseous state. So they have to chill them down to hundreds of degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. I think SpaceX said for methane, if I was listening to John Innsbrucker during the commentary, he said it was minus 272 degrees Fahrenheit for the methane that's loaded into Starship and Superheavy. So that's very cold. And I think oxygen is around the same, 300 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, if I recall. And hydrogen, which is used on the Space Launch System for Artemis, is closer to minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's even colder. So all of these fluids are gaseous in the warm air here in South Texas or at the Cape, but they need to be chilled down to cryogenic temperatures to put into a liquid form to put on the rocket. And of course, a rocket with firing its engines in space with no oxygen, you need oxygen for combustion. So every rocket has to carry its own oxidizer with it. In this case, it's liquid oxygen.
I'm watching you talk with on stream as well right here. This is awesome, Stephen. How is the sun over there? It looks like it's beating down on you guys. Speaking of temperatures.
Yeah, I need to put on a hat soon.
Well,
yeah, I need my sunglasses too.
Okay, so quick a bit on this as well that we can get you guys out of the sun here a bit sooner. So we're going to wrap up about 20 minutes after the hour here. So get in all of your final questions while you still can, while we go through some of these things. And I did pull up the information again real quick of what the boiling point is of all these things. And yeah, we're above all, or I'm sorry, below the boiling point for the numbers you gave. So negative 298 Fahrenheit for LOX, negative 260 Fahrenheit for methane, which is negative 162 degrees Celsius, and negative 183 degrees Celsius for LOX. So anyways, the the temperature is going to be very interesting with, as you said, the South Texas sun beating down on this vehicle. And that's actually another thing they have to do is kind of cool down the vehicle as well. So even though they're pumping in cryogenic liquid oxygen, liquid methane, we're going to see, we saw a lot of venting earlier, and we typically see a lot of venting out the vehicle because there's just too much pressure building up that they have to send it somewhere. And so they typically vent off the oxygen side, and then they try to recycle the methane. By the way, quick status check from you guys. What does it look like on the booster right now for you? Do you see a lot of condensate coming off of the booster, or is it still looking, or is it looking like there's not much there?
It doesn't look like there's much condensate right now. You know, of course, we have a lot of ice and frost, but it's very minimal as far as condensate.
Okay, I'm seeing that too on my side, and I'm seeing it. It's only up to like halfway on the LOX tank for the condensate, and I can barely see much on the methane tank on the booster side for the condensate. So I'm thinking they've already detanked quite a bit here. Now it's just down to the last few rings on the methane tank. I'm actually seeing a little bit more. I think I might be on the left-hand side of the condensate. So those are the clouds that you see filming off the vehicle, and I think barely I can see some on the left-hand side. So it's a bit higher on the methane side and maybe a bit higher on the LOX side as well. It's just the wind is not working with us here today.
Yeah, the wind has definitely started to pick up as the day is progressing. So you'll have to, we apologize for any shakiness of the camera here. We got a big lens, as you saw on some of the camera feed earlier, and it's kind of like a wind sail.
So some of this stuff, if you like, stick out your thumb real quick. How big is the booster compared to your thumb at arm's reach for just kind of perspective, just to say how big things are in your view?
When I stick my thumb out, my thumb, just like my first knuckle from my thumbnail down to the first knuckle, covers up the entire launch pad.
Wow. Okay, so that's like just over postage stamp sized.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, that's why whenever you walk around or anything, we could probably see a little bit of camera shake as well, and the wind picking up will do that as well. But it has a very interesting view. Thank you for being out there, lab. By the way, Phila Kid, do we have any questions so far that we would like to go through right now, or super chats?
Well, I have a couple super chats, new member, and a couple of follow-up questions. Ronaldo Neves, 1.9 Brazilian real. Rocket, $9.99 US. The risk propellant detonation is high. Why not launch booster only with the arrow nose, eliminating the risk of ship fuel and hardware until the 33 engine booster launch confidence is high? So I think what he's looking for is why, again, a question asked earlier, why didn't they just launch the booster by itself?
Well, so the issue hasn't been the Starship. First off, the issue we've had today was with the booster again. and that was basically a valve issue on the booster. Everything else should have checked out. If that valve had worked out today, we should have had a launch. We didn't have any issues on the second stage on the Starship, and we've already had a lot of testing for all of the Starships. So as you mentioned, the booster itself is the thing that we're mainly testing, but they really want to get that structural test in of the full stack of all of that weight. Because if you just put a nose cone on the booster and launch it, you could basically get it almost to do an SSTO, which is a single stage to orbit. However, it wouldn't really accomplish much or do much, except we would light some engines, get it pretty far, but it just wouldn't do much. It would basically re-enter it in the atmosphere again fairly quickly, because you can't get it quite to SSTO. You can get kind of close, but anyways, the real structural elements here are the things that we're testing, and all of the other dynamics at play, the aerodynamics, basically those interesting nuances that you have that will be interplay between the different systems that you cannot test for without launching the entire vehicle. So that's by at least my reason why. Anybody else have other good reasons why they believe that we should launch the full stack versus
in the
otherwise?
PEA, if I remember correctly, they have 5 launches per year, and a suborbital of the booster was factored into those 5 launches. The ship didn't factor into those launches, but I'm pretty sure any launch of the booster did, because of just the sheer number of engines and the noise and all the various issues the PEA brought up. So I think that definitely factors into why they haven't tried to do like a suborbital hop of the booster itself.
So limited testing windows, limited times you can do this.
Yes.
Will really factor into the whole thing. One thing I kind of noticed with the launch license itself, it didn't give a hard limit to say how many they can do per year. So what the interesting thing is, that implies that SpaceX will have to go through, do all their launches, their 5 launches, let's say this year. And then they can go back to the FAA and say, we would like to do additional launches. Here is all of the review documentation for safety factors, all of the other information about any anomalies we've had. That's something they're already required to do, but it will give that full view of safety. And they'll be able to say, we would like to do additional launches. So we could see with just basically a simple additional review and some elements given to the FAA to have extended number of launches, because it's not a hard limit per license. It's a limit per the PEA. So it's just one element that I wanted to jump into.
Yeah, no, and that's something I've kind of wondered from the beginning, is if they get through their 5 launches, they get a lot of data, and there's still time left in the year with that updated information, will they then be allowed to launch more often? Because ultimately we know down the line, 5 launches a year from Boca is just not the cadence they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for a much higher cadence in Boca Chica.
Yeah, it's just the bare minimum amount to get some of that testing data that they really need and require. And they're going to, let's face it, they're going to change a lot of things on the vehicle based off of that testing data. So basically the question that had come up that we're kind of answering still is that all of that gets reflected back onto each vehicle iteration. So for instance, right now, Elon has mentioned there are hundreds of changes on Booster 9 compared to Booster 7. So the first big one he mentioned, and we've known about for quite a while, but it's a really cool one, is the electric TVC. So that will allow them to not need basically the hydraulics, which are kind of a contaminant as well in the ocean. You don't want, if you're going to throw them in the ocean, that's not going to be as fun as or as environmentally friendly as doing the electric TVC. And that actually will weigh less, so you have more payload mass that you can be able to launch into orbit. That's a huge one. And basically the other changes that we've seen are structural elements as well. We already see more stringers on future boosters. So they went from a minimal design, let's say with looking at Booster 1, pretty much had 0 stringers on large sections of it, to I'll go to Booster 4. That had no stringers on the methane tank, but stringers on the LOX tank. Now they're increasing the number of stringers on, I think it was Booster 10 or 11. I'd have to go ask Jax on that one, but they are increasing the numbers of stringers. I think they're actually doubling it on the methane tank. And so it's going to be able to hold the whole stack vertically without being pressurized potentially. That's one of the things that we're theorizing, that it's going to be able to do at least that. So if you have pressurization issues, it still holds itself together, and that would be a really good thing to do. I guess we've covered that question pretty thoroughly. What are the other questions we've got here, Phila Kid, or any other donations?
I want to welcome a new member, Gnarly B.
Sounds like they're Gnarly B's calling you right now. You still there, Phila Kid? Or
I am. And let's see.
don't worry, I had the dogs in the background trying to do stuff earlier, so it's always interesting.
Here's a question from Robert Wells that came in before the scrub. What if we can send the kids into space in a safe way in the year 2100?
He said kids, KIDS?
KIDS.
Okay. Well, I think there's a great anime that you can watch to go through and fulfill that entire question, and other questions of AI called Orbital Children. It pretty much is answering that whole thing, because it's all about Starship and that future of basically space exploration, to the point where you could just send kids up on a Starship and get a full view of what it would be like to be on orbital space stations that are basically that nice fabric, not fabric, but a flexible space station. So that's one that's an interesting anime that you can go through and watch. I've enjoyed that one. There's another one called Planetets, that's is more about removal of space junk. But anyways, those are the ones of my top recommended list of animes to watch about space. And they're pretty accurate to a certain degree. And I think the Orbital Children one also deals with AI. But anyways, that would probably be able to answer your question best.
There's a question from Sarah KB7 again. Could frozen dihydrogenous monomonoxide affect the performance of the fuel valves?
Yeah. So I was mentioned that earlier, that frozen water, as you like to put it, dihydrogen monoxide. No, dihydrogen monoxide. Yeah. Basically, that's H2O. It will be able to accumulate sometimes on the valves and gets them to stick, and that's an unfortunate part. So oftentimes what you see is they will do a dry nitrogen purge, which means they will put gaseous nitrogen at basically room or hot temperatures through the pipes in order to remove any water condensate that somehow got in there from the atmosphere. So sometimes you open up pipes, or the pipes are open on the other end, water comes in, it accumulates in places, and then it comes through the rest of the system. And that's a problem. We saw them go through and do a purge on the entire integration tower on the ship QD, for instance, to help remove any of that water contaminants or other potential debris that was in there. It was just a nitrogen purge again, that was a dry nitrogen. So it means that it was free of any oxygen and water and that kind of stuff. So that's the best solution to that problem. And yeah, it does potentially stick the valves closed.
And again, at this point, we didn't see any of that in operation, so that would not have been an issue with any particular valves today.
It could be. It's just it's the question of which valve it was, where it was, how did it get stuck. We don't have that answer. It could be just thermal expansion and contraction again. It's hard to answer the exact question there.
Well, again, we didn't see the FireX system light up, so it didn't impact today's valve issue at all.
Oh, so the question, maybe I misunderstood the question. It was directed to FireX specifically?
Yeah, isn't the dihydrogen monomonoxide the hydrogen or the FireX system?
Well, yeah, so there will be water coming from the FireX system, but I thought the question had to do with valves specifically.
Yeah. Did the water freeze and cause the valve to freeze?
So they're two separate systems, and there isn't really any like liquid nitrogen or liquid oxygen or anything that would be pouring over the FireX basically system, so there shouldn't be anything freezing over on that side. Otherwise, we have seen, let's say, burst pipes, for instance, because that's the first thing that really happens. You don't usually get a valve that's stuck. You burst a pipe because you've frozen the water on the inside. If that's the question that was asked, I'd have to go back to the look at the question here to answer that. But I think it was just a valve in the booster that's gotten stuck, and I think that was the question that was being asked earlier.
Okay. Another question from Robert Wells. What did we learn today?
Pressure issues are always a problem with vehicles. That's something we kind of relearned here today. Let's see. I got to see some interesting lines underneath the Starship. What did you learn, Nate?
Well, yeah, like always, space is hard. It's hard to get to space, whether it's a established rocket or especially with the new experimental one. As much as we as fans want to see it be, a perfect textbook, load and go, that's just not how it works. And some of the views SpaceX shared, they were very interesting, especially as you said, Thomas, the view underneath and the lines that we got to see. And I know a lot of people in some various places are going to be combing through those pictures to try to figure out what they can with those views.
Oh, one thing I'd learned was watching it T-1 minute 30. They will gimbal the engines in a very unusual pattern. It's they spread them out so that they go off in each direction differently, and then the center one kind of gimbals around by itself, or the center three just say, "Hey, I'm doing my own stuff over here." But yeah, that was kind of cool. So we can see a lot of little details like that. We'll be going through them in Discord after the show here ends in another 5 minutes. So we'll need to go through and wrap up and ask any final questions. Type @questions. We'll try to actually go through and do a speed round here for answering those.
Okay, I've got a question from Alaska Space. This valve issue is in the booster. Wouldn't any inspection or repairs be done with a windmill lift and no D-stack required?
Depending on which valve it is, it would be either a windmill lift to look at the valve if it's an exterior valve, or if it's an interior valve, it would most likely be at the bottom of the vehicle. So you would have to open up the manhole cover on the LOX tank, and that's where you do your ingress egress.
And my last question on the list, any idea of the exact date for the next launch?
No, but I would hold my breath if it wasn't 420.
Well, 48 hours from now, let's see, that should be 19th Wednesday, which we currently have one of the scheduled days, but it could always just move a little bit more over to that 20th. So we're looking at about the same time, 7:20 or 8:20 on the 19th or 20th.
I'm done with all my questions that have come. Oh, here's another question. Stephanie B. It's a dihydrogen monoxide, not monoxide, as in CO carbon monoxide. And that does it for the questions, the super chats, and the new members.
All right, perfect. Sounds like a good time for us to start wrapping up. And by the way, we hit 2,000 earlier. Or 200,000, sorry. Not 2,000, 200,000. What are we at right now, by the way?
7,500.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like about right. Things are wrapping up, but that's quite amazing. We started off with, what was it? Just a few thousand viewers. I think we were at like 15,000, and then it went up to like 150, 160. So really big day. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been just amazing. I'm going to go ahead and actually start wrapping things up now and hand it off to Steven, and then everybody else who wants to say goodbye, and then hand it back off to me. So today has been great. Thank you for having me. Off to you, Nate.
Hey, yeah, great day. Really would have loved to have seen the launch, but hey, that just means there's more excitement later in the week. So see y'all soon, and Phila.
Just wanted to thank again the 220,000 viewers that popped in today to see us, and we'll see you on Wednesday or Thursday of this week, we hope. Everybody have a good week.
And Steven, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. It's a shame that we had a scrub today, but there's an old adage in space flight. You'd rather be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So that's where we are today.
Ooh, good adage. Thank you. Actually, Phila Kid, or Lab, want to go ahead and actually sign off as well, since you've been jumping in?
Yes, sir. I appreciate everybody hanging out with us today. It was a pleasure feeding these great views to you all. And, a special thanks to Stephen for being with us today and partnering up with us. And it was a wonderful day. Too bad we missed it. But thank you all for the super chats, the donations. And we will see y'all here in a couple of days.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us again. It's been amazing. And I'd like to go ahead and thank the following people real quick. So our admins, Chef Daddy, Lucid, Rusty Buckets, our Discord and YouTube mods, Daryl, MVN, Stumpy 001, 61 Naps on Discord only, Anthony, Ark, Calypso, Tablano, myself. We've got YouTube mods, Andrew Lester, Andrew CJ42, Bogdan C, Dave W, Film Jim, Gridleak, Michael McKenzie, Neil Omatic, Psychonaut 421, Scott Dubs, STS 125. And then like to go ahead and thank the other supporters of our channel, as well as everybody who supported us today. We've got Sapphire Condominiums. And then, where did I put that note here? Okay, also South Padre Island, or Isla Grand Beach Resort. Sorry, I'm having to go through and double check some things. And in it, Weather, Stumpy 001, John Heyman, Crow Guy, and thank you for all of their support. And also a big thank you to Lab. And put a thumbs up in the chat or applause or whatever you can to thank everybody here today. It's been awesome. We're going to be doing this again here in 2 days. So at least 2 days from now. So signing off, this is Thomas. Hopefully we'll go for launch next time.
We will see y'all. And just to let you know, we are going to stay live until we're completely detanked, more than likely, just to keep this wonderful feed up. And once again, thank you all. And Lab Padre out.